Hey there, Night Wanderer. You made it. Again. And before we slip into the strange, scratchy, slightly smelly world of the past, let's dim the lights, fluff whatever passes for a pillow, and take a breath. Because tonight, we're not just traveling back in time, we're crawling into bed with history. Literally. If you've enjoyed these bedtime dives into humanity's more questionable life choices, don't forget to like this video, share it with your fellow insomniacs, and subscribe to the channel. Every click tells me you want more tales of turnips, tooth decay, and why no one in 1320 ever truly slept alone. Drop a comment too. Let me know where you're tuning in from and when it is over there. Trust me, reading those at 2 a.m. is oddly comforting. And now, let's meet someone special. Her name is Marjorie. She's 31, which back then was considered dangerously close to ancient. She lives in the charming Mud and Hope village of Wormbridge. And her job? She makes candles, which sounds peaceful until you realize that wax burns, soot stains, and tallow smells like regret. But even so, she rises before the rooster can yawn because sleep wasn't something you pursued in medieval England. It was something that tackled you mid-task, face first into a haystack. Today, we'll explore the first secret of her surprisingly effective sleep ritual. It's not melatonin. It's not mindfulness. It's not even a bath. It's exhaustion. Glorious, bone-deep, soul-sucking fatigue. Marjorie doesn't wind down. She collapses after hauling water, skinning beeswax, dodging goats, and birthing a sheep that isn't hers. Yes, that happened. She doesn't scroll TikTok. She doesn't even think. She sits and immediately forgets how to be awake. So settle in. We're just getting started. This isn't a fantasy. This is medieval sleep science powered by blisters, back pain, and one very judgmental goat. Marjorie doesn't sleep alone. She doesn't even get her corner. Forget memory foam or weighted blankets. This is medieval England, and Marjorie's bedtime companions include 2 children. Her niece, who just stayed one night 5 months ago, her husband, who snores like he's trying to warn ships off the coast, and Myrtle, the goat. Yes, a real goat. Myrtle chews with her mouth open, stinks like damp hay in July, and insists on sleeping pressed against Marjorie's back like a furry, living hot water bottle with boundary issues. But let's back up a bit. You see, in Wormbridge, privacy is a myth. It is a charming concept best reserved for kings and castles. For Marjorie, a bedroom means a straw pile that's marginally less wet than the one next to the hearth, maybe tucked behind a curtain that flaps in the breeze like a defeated sail. Her entire family shares one room, one roof, and one desperate hope that nobody has gas tonight. Co-sleeping wasn't a parenting choice. It was survival. Winters in this village don't whisper, they bite. The walls are made of mud, love, and prayers. The windows, if you can call them that, are holes stuffed with wool or animal hide. On a good day, the temperature inside is just a few degrees warmer than the frost outside. Unfortunately, on a bad day, you can see your own breath. And Myrtle's. So they huddle. They layer wool, bodies, and whatever dignity remains. A tangle of limbs, snores, and the occasional midnight elbow to the ribs. Marjorie doesn't mind. Not really. Because here's the secret. Body heat was currency, and it was traded generously. Does your toddler kick? Sure. Does your cousin hog the blanket? Fine. But everyone wakes up alive, and in the Middle Ages, that's a win. And here's the kicker. Marjorie doesn't expect silence. That's a modern affliction. We chase perfect stillness like it's the key to a better REM cycle, and blackout curtains and ocean soundscapes will finally solve the puzzle of sleep. But Marjorie, she sleeps through the creaks of wood, the rhythmic cough of her neighbor with winter lungs, and the unmistakable sound of Myrtle, well, expressing herself. It's not just tolerated, it's comforting. The soft rise and fall of her family's breath, the rustle of someone turning over, and the low crackle of dying embers in the hearth make her feel less alone, less vulnerable. Noise, in its strange way, becomes the lullaby. And let's be honest, Myrtle's occasional midnight fart has more character than any white noise machine. But don't let the coziness fool you. This isn't some rustic sleepover. It's strategic. Every head under that roof is another degree of warmth, another shield against the bitter cold that sneaks through every crack in the wall. Marjorie might not have down comforters or central heating, but she has a community and a goat with questionable manners. Let's talk about that straw mattress for a second. It's not a mattress, not in the way we imagine. It's more like a suggestion of a bed. a pile of dry grass and rushes that gets flatter, crunchier, and itchier with every passing week. Occasionally, someone tosses fresh straw on top like they're seasoning a stew, never quite removing the old layer. It's less luxury bedding and more mattress lasagna, complete with rogue fleas and the occasional potato beetle. And yet, it works. Because Marjorie isn't trying to optimize her sleep, she's just trying to survive it. There's no bedtime routine involving herbal tea, no journal by the nightstand, and no self-help book titled How to Master Deep Sleep in 5 Easy Steps. There's just Marjorie, a wool tunic she hasn't washed since Michaelmas, and the weight of Myrtle's judgmental gaze. Now let's talk about dreams. Marjorie still dreams. Oh yes, but her dreams aren't about flying or showing up naked to church. They're primarily about soup, warm soup, maybe with meat, maybe with some salt, which is about as rare as a vacation. Sometimes, if she's particularly blessed, her dream includes a second blanket, the luxury. But those dreams only come when the fire's still glowing, her kids have stopped fighting for the middle, and Myrtle isn't snoring directly into her ear. It's not often, but when it happens, it's magic. And that, dear listener, is the beauty of co-sleeping in medieval England. It's chaotic, it's cramped, it's occasionally pungent, but it's human. It reminds you in the quiet and the clutter that we've always needed each other, not just for love, not just for survival, but for sleep. So next time you're adjusting your memory foam pillow, sighing because your partner stole the duvet, or groaning because your dog is hogging the bed, think of Marjorie, think of Myrtle. Think of a straw mattress that crackles when you roll over and might bite back. And take comfort in that you too are part of an ancient, very itchy tradition. And if you're lucky, maybe tonight you'll dream of soup. Let's talk about darkness. Not the emotional kind. We'll save that for when we get to medieval marriage, but the physical kind. Absolute, unapologetic, pitch black darkness. It's the night that swallows you whole and doesn't even burp. After a long day, elbow deep in wax, soot, and whatever that weird puddle near the goat was, Marjorie is wrapped in a blanket that smells like 3 winters ago. She lies down on her scratchy straw pile, wedged between her youngest child and Myrtle, the goat-shaped furnace. And then, just like that, night falls. And when I say falls, I mean it. There's no gentle dimming. There is no soft transition. The sun dips below the hills, and suddenly the world turns into a void. No streetlights, no glowing alarm clocks, no 3 a.m. fridge raids, just black. If she's lucky, the only light in Marjorie's home comes from the smoldering embers in the hearth or a single tallow candle, smoky, stubby, and burning with the enthusiasm of someone who's just been asked to work unpaid overtime. It casts a faint glow, not enough to read by, not enough to find the chamber pot without stepping on someone, but just enough to remind you how much you miss the sun. And here's the twist. Marjorie doesn't mind. Because of this darkness, it's not scary, it's sacred. See, we've grown up fearing the dark. We buy night lights for our closets, backlight our toothbrushes, and fall asleep to TV shows just so the silence doesn't eat us alive. But Marjorie, she thrives in it. The darkness is her signal. It tells her body, okay, no more spinning flax, no more yelling at the goat, shut it all down. And her brain, bless its medieval simplicity, listens. This absence of artificial light does something magical. Naturally, it resets her circadian rhythm without apps, hacks, or melatonin that tastes like watermelon sadness. Her eyes, adjusted to the slow dying glow of the fire, ease into the night with no protest. Her mind doesn't spin with to-do lists because her to-do list is always the same. Don't die, don't let the goat eat the table. And that kind of clarity, it's oddly peaceful. Let's add a twist most people don't know about. Marjorie doesn't sleep all night. No one did. In the Middle Ages, sleep came in 2 acts. First sleep and second sleep. It was like a Broadway show, but with fewer dance numbers and more blanket stealing. The first sleep hits early, soon after sundown. It's deep, uninterrupted, and heavy, the kind of sleep where your dreams start without permission. Marjorie usually conks out right after her knees stop cracking and her youngest stops humming to himself. For 4 or 5 hours, she's out cold, dreaming of warm soup, authentic shoes, and a life without goats in bed. Then, like clockwork, she wakes up, not in a panic, not with anxiety, just awake around midnight. And here's where it gets weirdly lovely. This in-between time, between first and second sleep, isn't some restless tossing and turning nightmare. It's intentional, it's expected. It's even a little sacred. Marjorie might stir the embers, warm her hands by the fire, and whisper to her husband about tomorrow's candle orders. Maybe she prays, or if Myrtle's not watching, she and her husband, ahem, enjoy the quiet. And then, an hour or two later, she slips back under the itchy blanket and into her second sleep. Like a pro. No stress, no guilt, no scrolling through medieval Instagram, just calm. This segmented sleep wasn't a disorder, it was the default. Modern society has trained us to believe that waking up in the middle of the night means something's wrong. But for Marjorie, it meant something was working. Her body knew when to rest, when to reflect, and when to drift again. And that's kind of beautiful. Now, imagine that kind of darkness. Not just the absence of light, but the lack of interruption. No blinking LEDs, no buzzing notifications, no existential dread triggered by your email count. A woman, her goat, and a sleep cycle are so natural that modern sleep science looks like a bad group project. And while we're here, let's talk about the silence. Well, not silence exactly. It's more like natural background noise. The creaking of wood beams contracting in the cold, the quiet breathing of children, the occasional grunt from Myrtle, who dreams vividly and possibly violently. These sounds don't jar Marjorie awake, they hold her. They cradle her in familiarity. It's not the silence of a soundproof room. It's the soft lull of life continuing, even as she sleeps. There's something primal about this. Something comforting. Something we've lost. We chase stillness now. White noise, meditation, blackout curtains, thinking we need to block out everything to rest. But Marjorie doesn't block it out. She blends with it. She lets the world hum quietly around her and uses it as her lullaby. Even the dark, to her, isn't an enemy. It's a companion. It wraps her up like a second blanket, far softer than the one she owns, and whispers, "You've done enough. Sleep." And that, friends, is the third secret of medieval sleep magic. Forget smart beds, brainwaves, and bedtime ASMR playlists. The real trick is embracing the night like an old friend who doesn't need to be fixed, just felt. So tonight, when you turn off your lights, try this. Close your eyes and pretend the only thing lighting your room is a candle flickering from across the house. Imagine the silence is not emptiness, but life, breathing, shifting, snoring faintly. And tell yourself, like Marjorie does every night, there's nothing more I need to do. Then sink. Because sleep isn't a battle, it's a surrender. And Marjorie, she's a master. Let's get weird. Because now we're stepping into one of the strangest, most surprisingly effective sleep habits of medieval peasants. Something so oddly perfect, it might just blow your insulated melatonin gummy chewing mind. We're talking about segmented sleep. Yes, that is the thing we brushed on in the last section. It's time to get serious. Because for Marjorie, this wasn't some cute historical quirk. This was her circadian rhythm, served in two messy, wool scratchy halves with a side of cold air and goat breath. Let's rewind. So, Marjorie falls asleep just after sunset, around 7 or 8, depending on how cloudy it is or whether Myrtle knocked over the firewood again. That first sleep hits her like a runaway cart. It's deep, heavy, and arrives with zero resistance. Why? Because she spent the entire day hauling water, making candles, chasing children, avoiding dysentery, and dealing with the existential exhaustion of living in a house that leaks from both ends. Her eyes closed, her breathing slows, her mind doesn't ask, did I say something dumb 5 years ago? It just stops. It's like someone flipped a switch labeled shut it all down. And then, sometime after midnight, ma'am, she's awake. No panic, no anxiety, just awake. Eyes open, blanket slightly damp from condensation or goat. The fire burned low, casting shadows on the rafters. Someone nearby is snoring like they swallowed a harmonica. And Marjorie? She sits up. This, right here, is what medieval folks called the watch, a slice of time between first and second sleep, roughly an hour or two of quiet wakefulness where people lived. Marjorie might tend the fire, or mend a tear in her only dress, or rub lavender oil onto her aching feet if she's feeling fancy. Sometimes she prays. Sometimes she and her husband whisper about the next market day. Sometimes, if Myrtle isn't staring, they get frisky. Yes, in the cold, on straw, with a goat 10 inches away. Romance is relative. But what's truly mind-blowing is that no one in her village thinks this is weird, because it wasn't. It was normal, expected. If someone was up at 2 a.m., walking the muddy path between cottages or chatting quietly by candlelight, nobody screamed insomnia or offered them chamomile tea. They just nodded and said, Second sleep soon? This wasn't some accidental glitch in the peasant's brain. It was part of a deeply rooted natural rhythm, one that modern life strangled with Edison bulbs and 9 to 5 schedules. Back then, your sleep was tailored to the sun, the seasons, and your body's tired little tantrums. Even better, that waking period, the in-between hour, it wasn't wasted. It was peaceful, introspective, sacred even. Medieval folks believed it was the best time for deep thoughts, prayer, or apparently goat-side cuddling. And for Marjorie, who spent most of her day moving, sweating, and surviving, this brief window of stillness was a rare moment of calm. Think about that. A time to breathe, to reflect, to exist. Compare that to now, when if you wake up at 2 a.m., you panic scroll Reddit threads titled, "Why am I broken?" and wonder if your bed is cursed. You start counting hours, calculating how ruined tomorrow will be, and eventually fall asleep right before your alarm goes off. But Marjorie, she doesn't count hours. She waits for sleep to return like a tide rolling back in, and when it does, she's ready. Second, sleep is lighter, softer. It drifts in gently, wrapping her in the last hours of the night like a whisper. There are no expectations, no alarms, just slow breathing and the occasional hoot of an owl outside her thin, fur-stuffed window. And when the sun finally peeks over the frost-covered hills, Marjorie wakes, not groggy, not grumpy, but restored. Not because she slept 8 uninterrupted hours, but because she followed a rhythm older than science, older than sleep apps, older than comfort. Let's be honest, this 2-sleep system, it makes sense. Ever wake up in the middle of the night and instead of fighting it, you just sat, read a book, stared out the window, and weirdly, you felt calmer afterward, like your body knew something you didn't? That's what Marjorie does, every night. Without guilt, without fear. Just her, the fire, and the occasional snort from Myrtle. It wasn't just practical, it was healing. And look, this isn't a suggestion to rip out your blackout curtains and start sleeping on hay, please don't. But it is a gentle reminder that maybe, just maybe, our ancestors weren't clueless. Perhaps they weren't just surviving. Maybe they were, in their own itchy, goat-infested way, thriving. So next time you wake up at 2 a.m., try not to curse the clock. Try sitting up. Light a candle, figuratively, please. Breathe. Think of Marjorie warming her hands by the embers, whispering nonsense to her husband while Myrtle groans in her sleep. Think of a world where darkness wasn't feared, stillness wasn't wasted, and waking up didn't mean you were broken. Because you're not broken, perhaps you're just medieval. And maybe that's precisely what your sleep needs. Now, before you picture Marjorie slipping back into her second sleep like a medieval angel on a bed of clouds, let's be clear. She's not drifting off in complete serenity because her secret weapon, her unspoken sleep MVP, her unsung nighttime hero, is herbs. Yes, herbs. It's not the kind you toss on roasted potatoes, not the type your cousin swears cured his anxiety and also gave him a weird rash. We're talking about real, dried, crinkly, sometimes bug-infested, often slightly questionable medieval herbs, tied in bundles and hung from the rafters like sleepy little talismans. Let's rewind. Marjorie lives in a cottage that smells like a mix of damp wool, leftover turnip stew, and goat sweat. Cozy. But even she knows that if you want decent dreams, if you want your kids to stop twitching like cursed puppets, and your husband to stop mumbling about tax collectors in his sleep, you need to do a little prep work. So, before the second sleep, Marjorie checks her herb ropes. These are literal strings of plants, tied and twisted, hanging from the low beams above her bed like the world's saddest, earthiest party decorations. Lavender, for one, the diva of medieval sleep aids. Even peasants knew this plant slapped when it came to relaxation. It wasn't about science. Marjorie didn't need a study from Oxford. She just knew that when her room smelled like lavender, everyone slept deeper. Myrtle the goat included. Then there's chamomile, dried, dusty, and tucked in cloth pouches beneath her mattress. Marjorie calls it the whisper plant because it doesn't punch you in the nose like mint or garlic. It just floats around your head like a calming ghost. It doesn't fix your back pain but makes you care less. That's a win. And let's not forget mugwort. Yes, mugwort, the plant that sounds like a wizard's sidekick but smells like sleepy dirt. In medieval folklore, it was believed to ward off bad dreams, evil spirits, and annoying husbands. Marjorie couldn't confirm that, but the rats stopped chewing on her sandals since she kept a bundle near the door. Coincidence? She thinks not. Her little cottage is a sensory sleep cave. Not clean, not pretty, but functional. Each herb is chosen not because of Pinterest or some medieval TikTok hack, but because it worked, or at least it smelled like it worked. And that's half the battle. The point is, Marjorie didn't just fall into sleep, she built it like a fortress. She layered exhaustion, darkness, silence, and finally, smell. And not a nice smell, not a cucumber melon candle smell. We're talking herbal, earthy, honest-to-God medieval aromatherapy. It wasn't glamorous. Sometimes the herbs got moldy. Sometimes a kid sneezed and scattered dried petals all over the bed. Once, a bundle fell directly on Marjorie's face and scared her half to death. But still, she persisted. Because when living in a one-room hut with 10 living things, 4 of which snore, every ounce of peace matters. And herbs, they mattered. Not just for their smell, but for the ritual, the routine, the small, deliberate act of preparing a space to rest. In a world where sleep was never guaranteed, illness, wolves, or an accidentally extinguished fire could ruin your night or your life, those little bundles of lavender and mugwort were acts of rebellion, of hope, of stubborn, fragrant optimism. Even Marjorie's kids, wild as they were, learned the bedtime scent. They'd roll into their straw pile, inhale the herbal haze, and let their muddy eyelids drop. No lullabies, no bedtime stories, just the smell of rosemary and the muffled grumble of myrtle shifting her considerable weight. And yes, there were superstitions too. Marjorie didn't just use herbs to sleep. She used them to keep away the bad things. Spirits, curses, nightmares shaped like her mother-in-law. Some nights she'd whisper charms as she tied fresh bundles. Not because she believed every word, but because words, like herbs, have weight. And saying them out loud reminded her she still had control over something, even if it was just the air around her bed. Of course, not all herbs were calming. Some were spicy. Some were bitter. Some, like valerian, smelled like unwashed socks soaked in despair. But that didn't stop Marjorie from using them. If it helped even a little, it stayed. Sleep to her wasn't about perfection, it was about trying, layer by layer, leaf by leaf. And here's the twist. It worked. With her cracked hands and aching back, Marjorie slept better than most of us. She didn't count sheep. She slept next to one. And she didn't buy sleep supplements in tiny, overpriced bottles. She grew her medicine in the dirt, hung it from the ceiling, and let it do its ancient, slightly smelly magic. So the next time you can't sleep, your room is too bright, your phone too tempting, or your brain won't shut up, think of Marjorie. Think of her sitting by the fire at 2 a.m., gently tucking a bundle of herbs into the rafters. Not because it's perfect, but because it's something. Something to signal, this is your space and time, and it's okay to rest now. And maybe you'll find your version of mugwort, even if it's just a sock stuffed with dryer sheets and a very optimistic attitude. Sleep isn't a product, it's a process, one that starts in your bones, wins through your routines, and ends in your breath. Marjorie knew that. You can too. Now close your eyes and breathe. Lavender's waiting. You might be thinking, okay, Marjorie's got exhausted, she's got a goat, she's got herb bundles that smell like a medieval forest on laundry day. What else could help her sleep better than me in 2025 with my orthopedic pillow and Spotify rain sounds? Well, here comes the plot twist. Seasonal sleep. That's right. Marjorie didn't just sleep differently because she lived in the past. She slept differently because she lived with the seasons. And winter? Winter was a whole different bedtime story. Let's set the scene. It's January in Wormbridge. The wind howls like it's auditioning for a horror film. The cottage walls, made of mud, straw, and the faint hope that moss is insulation, shudder with every gust. The fire is barely holding on. The air, it is so cold that your nose and hair freeze in unison. Welcome to medieval winter, where the soup is the only thing more frigid than the air. But here's the thing. Marjorie isn't panicking. She isn't pushing through like some productivity influencer yelling at her followers to wake up at 4 a.m. and conquer the day. No. Marjorie, bless her pragmatic soul, slows down. Because in the medieval world, winter wasn't a season to dominate. It was a time to survive. And one of the most innovative ways to do that? Sleep more. Yes, you heard me. Sleep. More. Marjorie doesn't rise at dawn like she does in the summer. The sun's barely out, and when it is, it's not making much effort. So she lingers in bed. Not because she's lazy, because she's not stupid. Her body, stiff from cold and tired from months of endless labor, demands rest. and for once, society agrees. In the colder months, medieval life slowed down on purpose. The fields were frozen, tools were dull, and even the goats were less obnoxious. There was no shame in sleeping longer, eating slower, or spending half your day huddled near the hearth. It was encouraged. Marjorie's sleep stretches. Instead of her usual segmented slumber, first sleep, midnight wakefulness, second sleep, winter nights often bring extended rest. Think 10, 12, or even 14 hours of intermittent snoring and goat kicking. And it's not just her, the whole village is quieter, softer, sleepier. Imagine that for a second. A whole community syncing itself to the rhythm of the natural world. No fluorescent lights, no buzzing alerts, just darkness, cold, and a universal understanding that the best way to get through it is to rest together in a big pile of blankets, breath fogging the air. And Marjorie? She's thriving. Sure, she's still working, feeding animals, mending clothes, trying to stop Myrtle from chewing on the firewood. But the pace is gentler. She doesn't hustle. She hibernates humanly. There's beauty in this, in the acknowledgement that our bodies aren't machines. They change with the seasons. Some nights, sleep isn't an indulgence. It's a strategy. And let's talk about the vibe of her cottage in winter. The fire is the heartbeat of the room. Crackling, snapping, casting shadows on the walls. Everyone huddles around it like it's a celebrity. The smoke hangs low, turning the air into a sleepy soup. The smell of ash and old wood blends with dried herbs overhead, lavender, mugwort, rosemary, now dry, brittle, and smoky sweet. It's not glamorous, but it's safe and warm and profoundly human. And when the wind howls too loud, when the fire dims, when her toes go numb even under 2 layers of wool, Marjorie doesn't curse the darkness. She pulls her children closer, burrows deeper into the straw, and lets the cold become part of the rhythm, a signal to rest, to wait, to be still. That's the 6th secret, seasonal surrender. Modern life tells us to fight nature, to light up the dark, to crank the thermostat. We must get up early, even when our bones beg for 5 more minutes. But Marjorie? She listens to the cold, she lets it dictate the pace, and because of that, her sleep isn't just longer, it's deeper, more restorative, more honest. And let's be real, this kind of winter sleep isn't just physical, it's emotional. People reflect in the dark months when there's less to do and more to feel. They grieve, they tell stories. Around the fire, Marjorie hears tales of lost loved ones, ghostly encounters, bad harvests, and better springs. And when she finally closes her eyes, she's not just tired. She's filled with memory, community, and something close to peace. You won't find that in your average sleep podcast. So the next time winter rolls in and your bed feels like a magnetic field pulling you down with unreasonable force, don't fight it. Be like Marjorie. Cancel your morning hustle. Sleep a little longer. Wake up slowly. Let the cold outside be a reason, not an excuse to rest. Remember, winter isn't the enemy. It's an invitation to go slower, to sleep deeper, to listen to your body, even if that body is covered in a blanket that smells like a goat, because sometimes the smartest thing you can do isn't to push through. It's to curl up, tuck in, and wait for spring. And if that means you dream a little longer, Marjorie would approve. Let's talk about Marjorie's bed. And no, this isn't where we reveal a surprise goose feather mattress, a medieval Tempur-Pedic, or some secretly luxurious peasant sleep tech. Far from it. Marjorie's bed happens when necessity, desperation, and a slight disregard for hygiene come together in a crunchy masterpiece of medieval sleep engineering. In other words, it's straw. Just straw. Old straw, new straw, damp straw, itchy straw. If she's lucky, maybe a layer of old rushes is thrown on top to pretend it's comfortable. Welcome to the sad, composting mess of a peasant mattress. Now remember in the last section how Marjorie sleeps more in winter? Well, this is what she's sleeping on. Through long frozen nights, on a pile that's slowly decomposing beneath her. Because that's what happens when your mattress is made of last season's wheat chaff and not anything remotely designed for the human spine. But let's give the straw some credit. It's breathable, it's insulating, it's replaceable, and best of all, it's cheap. This is key because Marjorie has 0 coins and a goat that eats anything vaguely soft. Every few months, okay, maybe once a year, she'll freshen it up, which doesn't mean buying a new mattress. It means shoveling out the old straw, which smells like a barn, had a midlife crisis, airing out the bed frame, a couple of creaky planks and wishful thinking, and stuffing in a new pile of scratchy golden hope. It's not luxurious, but it works. Sort of. See, Marjorie's not aiming for cloud-like comfort. She's aiming for I can lie here without immediately regretting every life decision. And when your daily activities include hauling firewood, birthing livestock, and dodging chamber pot spills, your standards shift. You're not asking for miracles. It's just something that doesn't poke you in the spleen while you sleep. But even the humble straw mattress has enemies, like fleas. Oh, the fleas. All of their civilizations shopped in the warm, slightly moist ecosystem of medieval bedding. They bite, jump, and live rent-free in your sleep zone. And you know what? Marjorie accepts them. Because if there's one thing that defines a medieval peasant's approach to discomfort, it's this. Could be worse. And it could. You could be sleeping directly on the dirt floor, which, by the way, Marjorie also does sometimes when the mattress is too moldy or the kids wet the bed, or Myrtle takes over the straw pile in a fit of goat-based entitlement. Then it's back to the floor, which isn't a floor. It's more like compacted earth with a texture between dried crust and slightly alive. Some families didn't even bother with beds. They'd collapse into corners, onto benches, or if you were fancy, into hay-filled crates. Imagine Airbnb, but medieval, and everyone leaves with lice. Now, let's talk bedding. Blankets. One is made of wool, heavy enough to double as a workout. It smells like smoke, sweat, and at least one incident involving spilled cabbage stew. It's never washed. Why? Because washing it would mean hauling water from the stream, boiling it for hours, scrubbing it by hand, then praying it dries before the next snowstorm. Too much work. So the blanket becomes seasoned. Pillows? Ha! Marjorie's pillow is her arm, a folded tunic, or a bundle of herbs tied in a cloth sack. Comfort is not the goal, warmth is, and even then, barely. And yet, here's the kicker. Marjorie still sleeps. Not always soundly, not always dreamily, but consistently, predictably. In the same spot night after night on a mattress that would give a chiropractor a stroke. And why? Because she's tired, because her body is done. Medieval life is like CrossFit, but with more mud and fewer protein shakes. She doesn't toss and turn over existential dread. She doesn't stay up doom scrolling through parchment scrolls. She lies down, pulls her goat-scented blanket over her chest, and knocks out like someone just hit her with a shovel made of exhaustion. That's the real magic here. It's not about the bed. It's about the body. Marjorie doesn't sleep because she's cozy. She sleeps because she's earned it. Every muscle, every blister, every cracked heel is a ticket to unconsciousness. Her mattress could be made of bricks and regret. She'd still sleep. Because rest, in her world, isn't a luxury. It's a survival mechanism. And let's not forget the social part. The beds weren't private. Not in Wormbridge. Most families slept together, piled in like mismatched spoons. You, your spouse, your children, your cousin visiting from 2 villages over, your goat's bad attitude, everyone shared the same cramped straw zone. You learned to ignore smells. You learned to sleep through snoring. You learned to accept that someone's foot was sometimes in your face. And you adapted because warmth beats dignity every time. Marjorie's bed isn't a bed. It's a system, a pile of straw, a community zone, a crash pad for the soul-crushing fatigue of medieval life. And while it wouldn't pass any modern inspection, it passes the only test that matters. She wakes up the next morning, alive, breathing, ready to do it all again. So tonight, when you fluff your pillow and sink into memory foam, know, somewhere in the dusty, scratchy past, Marjorie's rolling over on a lumpy heap of hay, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells like soup, sweat, and sheep, and she's sleeping just fine. Because when you're tired enough, even a compost pile can feel like heaven. And for Marjorie, that's more than enough. Let's talk about heat. Not the cozy kind that wraps around you like a hug from your favorite hoodie. No. We're talking about survival heat. The kind that doesn't come from a thermostat, a space heater, or a heated blanket with 17 settings. This is medieval heat. Wild, unpredictable, smoky, and often one accidental sneeze away from setting the roof on fire. Welcome to Marjorie's fireplace. In the absence of central heating, Marjorie's entire home revolves around a single open flame in the middle of the room. A fire pit, low, messy, stubborn, that does its best to fight back the cold with every flicker. It's not just the heart of the home. It's the lungs, the spine, and the overworked emotional support system of every freezing soul in Wormbridge. Remember that bed of straw Marjorie shares with her family and Myrtle, the goat with main character energy? Well, that crunchy pile sits strategically close to the hearth, not near enough to spontaneously combust, but close enough to feel the warmth, to hear the crackle, and to absorb just enough heat to make survival feel slightly less ridiculous. And this fire? It never goes out. Not if Marjorie can help it, because once it's gone, it's gone. Restarting it isn't like flicking a lighter, it's a ritual, a panic. A mad scramble for dry kindling is a mythical substance in the wet, eternal gloom of a medieval winter. So Marjorie tends to it religiously. Before sleep, she stacks the logs. During her midnight wakefulness, she stirs the coals. And in the early morning, when frost crawls along the walls, she's there, coaxing embers into flame with the patience of a saint and the desperation of a mother who doesn't want to freeze to death before breakfast. But here's the thing, this fire isn't contained in a fireplace with a cute mantle and a safety grate. No, it's just there, in the middle of the room, on a patch of stone, maybe, with smoke drifting upward in whatever direction it feels like, which, more often than not, is directly into Marjorie's face. Smoke is a part of life. It weaves through the air, turns the ceiling black, settles into the straw, and kisses every piece of clothing with a permanent ode to ash and regret. Marjorie coughs, wipes her eyes, and keeps going. Because smoke, annoying as it is, also keeps the bugs away, adds a layer of warmth, and makes everything feel alive. It's weirdly comforting. Like the fire is whispering, "You're still here. You made it through another freezing night." And honestly, that whisper matters, because the fire isn't just heat. It's light, too. It's security. It's the medieval version of a night light, and a home alarm system rolled into one. When predators roamed and shadows felt thick enough to choke on, that little orange glow reminded everyone they were safe and that the world hadn't ended, that there was still warmth, food, and hope. Marjorie sits by it after her second sleep, wrapped in her single wool blanket, toes stretched toward the glowing coals. The kids stir beside her, faces flushed from the heat, noses red from the cold that never really leaves. Myrtle grumbles, shifts her weight, and farts in protest. Marjorie doesn't flinch, because this moment, this smoky, stinging, warmth-drunk moment, is a kind of luxury. A pause between exhaustion and responsibility. A chance to breathe in the heat and out of the stress. And when the flames dance just right, casting shadows on the wall that almost look like stories, Marjorie dares to feel something close to peace. But it's a fragile peace. Wood is scarce. Gathering it is brutal. Trees are distant and the cold is greedy. Every log burned is a future chore added to someone's aching back. Marjorie knows this. Every piece of firewood is rationed like treasure. The kids are trained to keep Myrtle from nibbling the kindling. Marjorie barters candles for extra bundles because heat is currency and fire is gold. Still, they make it work. Sometimes they burn peat. Sometimes dried dung. Yes, you heard that right. Compressed, aged animal poop. Not ideal. But when the temperature drops and frost creeps over your socks, you stop being picky. If it burns, it's welcome. And when the flames die down to red coals and the smoke thins out, Marjorie knows it's time. She checks the straw, bundles the kids tighter, gives Myrtle a half-hearted shove back to her corner, and finally closes her eyes. Because fire means she can sleep. Not with ease, not without coughing, but with just enough warmth to let her mind drift. Just enough glow to keep the dark from swallowing her whole. Just enough safety to believe, even for a few hours, that morning will come, and they'll be okay. You see, in modern homes, heat is invisible. It flows silently through vents, obeys thermostats, and hums in the background. But in Marjorie's world, heat is a battle, a constant smoky negotiation between flame and frost. And when you win, even just for a night, it feels like a miracle. So next time you curl up in your warm bed, adjust the thermostat, and complain that your toes are a little chilly, spare a thought for Marjorie. Picture her crouched by the fire, smoke in her eyes, hands outstretched, tired but undefeated, keeping the flames alive for warmth, survival, sleep, and the stubborn joy of seeing another dawn. Because sometimes peace isn't found in silence or softness. It's in the crackle of firewood, the sting of smoke, and the quiet knowledge that you're still burning, still breathing, still here. Let's talk about noise. Not the city kind, the hum of traffic, the buzz of a neighbor's too loud TV, or that one car alarm that goes off every Thursday at 3 a.m. No, Marjorie's noise is older, wilder, earthier. the soundtrack of a medieval home that doesn't believe in silence. Because once the fire has been stoked, the straw pile fluffed as much as you can fluff straw, and the children wrapped like burritos in layers of wool and goat, the cottage doesn't go quiet. Not really. It settles. It breathes. It rustles and shifts and grumbles its way into the night. For Marjorie, sleep is never about silence. In fact, silence would be terrifying. It would mean the fire's out, the kids aren't breathing, the goat's dead. Silence in her world is ominous, suspicious, something to fear. Instead, what lulls her into sleep is the soft symphony of survival. Her husband Ulrich snores like he's trying to communicate with distant ships. One child grinds his teeth like he's auditioning to be a squirrel. The other mutters nonsense in his sleep, reliving a dream where he's chasing turnips or being chased by them. It's unclear. And Myrtle the goat? She sighs, loudly, with feeling, occasionally punctuated by what can only be described as a snort of disdain. Then there's the creak of wood beams shifting in the cold, the occasional snap from the fire, the wind scratching at the shutters like a stray cat trying to borrow some soup. And through it all, Marjorie breathes, in and out, matching her rhythm to the messy music of the night. This soundscape isn't accidental, it's essential. It reminds her she's not alone, that life, in all its flawed, noisy glory, is still moving, still warm, still loud enough to keep the shadows at bay. Let's be honest, we spend a lot of time chasing quiet. We buy soundproof curtains, white noise machines, headphones designed by monks. But Marjorie? She sleeps with the full volume of reality humming around her. And she wouldn't trade it for anything. Because when you live in a one-room cottage with no insulation, no privacy, and no Netflix, you learn to find comfort in company, even when that company is gassy, fidgety, and takes up 85% of the shared straw pile. Marjorie's ears are trained to recognize every nighttime noise. The difference between a child's dream whimper and an impending fever. The subtle change in Myrtle's snort that means she's about to steal someone's blanket. The slight hiss in the fire that tells her it needs another log, or maybe it's just the peat smoldering again. She hears it all, she processes it, and somehow she sleeps through most of it, but not because she's ignoring it, because she's integrated it. These sounds are her lullaby. Even the wind, sharp, relentless, rattling the thatch like it's trying to make a point, has a rhythm, a personality. It wails, it whispers, it complains, but it also reminds her. The outside world is trying to get in, and for now, it hasn't succeeded. That's a kind of peace no soundproof room can offer. Now, to be clear, it's not all gentle ambience. There are nights when the sounds escalate, a child gets sick, the goat escapes and thunders across the room like a small, angry horse. The firewood collapses unexpectedly, sending sparks into the air and everyone into panic mode. But even then, Marjorie knows the drill. Noise means action. Noise means life. And when the chaos dies back down, when everyone's settled and the goat's been shamed into lying down again, there's a strange kind of calm. Not silent, not still, but real, honest. Because the truth is, in the medieval world, sleep wasn't sacred. It was practical. You slept when you could, however you could, surrounded by whoever happened to be nearby. You didn't demand conditions. You didn't insist on perfect darkness, ideal temperatures, or curated playlists. You just laid down, accepted the noise, and let your body do what it needed. And Marjorie? She's mastered it. She doesn't yearn for silence. She doesn't resent the snoring, the muttering, the endless goat commentary. She folds herself into the noise like a blanket. She lets it hold her. Because that noise, however imperfect, is proof she's made it through another day. That her family is alive, breathing, making sounds that mean we're still here. And maybe deep down, she even enjoys it. The little shifts, the mumbles, the way her son kicks in his sleep, sending straw everywhere. The sound of her husband's exhale aligning with hers for a brief, perfect moment. The gentle shush of wind brushing against the shutter, as if the night itself is trying to soothe them all. These aren't distractions, they're reminders that even in a world of cold hunger and constant uncertainty, there are small certainties, rhythms, sounds that say, you are home, you are together, you can sleep now. So if you're lying awake, frustrated by the drip of a faucet, the hum of a fridge, or the not-so-soft breathing of your partner next to you, take a page from Marjorie's book. Listen, not with annoyance, but with curiosity. Let the noise in. Let it be part of the sleep, not an enemy of it. because sometimes the most beautiful lullabies aren't quiet at all. They're the sound of life continuing just outside your dreams. Now, just when you thought Marjorie's night couldn't get any more medieval, let's throw in the final, messy, and quite literally earthy element of her bedtime ritual, the chamber pot. Yes, the toilet, or more accurately, the absence of one. Because when nature calls in the middle of the night, Marjorie doesn't have the luxury of a flush, a fan, or even a functioning door. There is no bathroom down the hall. There is no porcelain throne. What she has is a pot, a squat, cracked, cold clay vessel sitting patiently in the corner like a grim little night sentinel. It's not elegant, it's not private, and it definitely isn't scented. But in a one-room cottage in the dead of winter, when stepping outside means risking frostbite and a surprise meeting with a curious badger, the chamber pot is salvation. Or at least the lesser evil. Now let's paint this picture right. Marjorie, half asleep, wrapped in a blanket that smells like goat dreams and smoke, shuffles over straw and limbs toward the pot. The room is dark, save for a flickering ember. Children are sprawled like drunk kittens, someone's foot is on her pillow, and Myrtle the goat has once again claimed the warmest spot near the fire. She moves slowly, quietly, because waking a sleeping child is like poking a bear, but louder, needier, and significantly more damp. Reaching the pot is a calculated effort. No knocking it over. No stepping in last week's accident. No making eye contact with anyone, including Myrtle, who judges from the shadows. This is medieval modesty at its most unglamorous, and once it's done, well, that's where things get spicy, because the pot doesn't empty itself. In the morning, Marjorie, or one of her more unfortunate offspring, will have to carry that sloshing vessel of horror outside across the frosty yard and dump it into the designated corner of the garden, known affectionately as the spot, a place where nothing grows but bad memories. Let's not romanticize it. The smell is biblical, the process is risky, and in the summer, add flies, lots of them. But in winter, it's just crunchy, frozen if they're lucky, manageable if they're not. And yet this humble, horrifying pot is a crucial piece of Marjorie's sleep puzzle. It means she doesn't have to walk into the woods at midnight. It means her kids aren't waking up soaked or scared. It means one small slice of control in a world that rarely offers any. Think about that. We chase sleep with gadgets, apps, routines, and blackout curtains. Marjorie, she has a goat, a straw pile, a smoky fire, and a pot full of regrets, and she still manages 8 hours, give or take a few snorts and snores. But that's the thing about medieval sleep, it's honest, brutally so. There's no hiding from bodily functions or pretending the night is pristine. Everything is exposed, shared, lived through together, and in some twisted way, the chamber pot is a symbol of that raw, unfiltered truth. Because Marjorie doesn't sleep like we do, alone, clean, and curated. She sleeps like a person embedded in her world, a world that doesn't apologize for being messy, a world where sleep isn't an escape from reality, but a gritty, intimate part of it. She accepts the discomfort, she plans for it, she works with it, not against it. Even the positioning of the pot is strategic. Close enough to reach, far enough to not smell too much, slightly shielded by a hanging cloth that pretends to be a curtain but is really just an old tunic with holes in it. It's not ideal, it's not hygienic, but it's better than freezing outside or soiling the straw where 5 people and a goat sleep. And really, what more do you want at 2 a.m. than a semi-private place to pee? Of course, not everyone had a pot. Some folks just went outside or used a bucket, or if they were particularly daring, the fireplace ashes. Yes, really. Which sounds efficient until you realize that ashes plus pee equals medieval cement. It doesn't go well. So Marjorie, despite the inconvenience, is grateful for her ceramic inconvenience. It may be cracked, it may be cursed, but it's hers. And here's the kicker. It's not even the worst part of nighttime hygiene, because after the pot, after the fire, after the endless snoring and goat glares, there's still the matter of washing, or more accurately, not washing. Marjorie doesn't brush her teeth before bed. She doesn't wash her face. There's no skincare routine, no sleepy tea, no meditation app reminding her to breathe with the moon. She wipes her hands on her apron, scratches her scalp, rolls over, and calls it a night. Water is too precious to waste on vanity. Soap, if it exists, is harsh and homemade. And warmth? That's reserved for the fire, not your bathwater. So the next time you grumble about brushing your teeth in cold tap water, think of Marjorie. Think of her curling up under a blanket that hasn't seen the wash basin in months, next to a pot that might spill if you sneeze too hard, surrounded by the warm, fragrant chaos of medieval sleep. And yet, she sleeps. Not because her environment is perfect, but because she's learned to rest within imperfection. That perhaps is the truest lesson from the past. Sleep isn't about eliminating every discomfort, it's about adapting to it, breathing through it, finding stillness inside the mess. So tonight, when you tuck yourself in, pillow fluffed, white noise humming, temperature set to 68 degrees, remember Marjorie and be thankful your bathroom has walls. Let's talk about what happens when Marjorie wakes up. Not the kind of wake up where you stretch, check your phone, and contemplate ignoring reality for 10 more minutes. No, Marjorie wakes up like someone escaping from a wool-wrapped, snore-infested hostage situation. Because remember, she hasn't just been sleeping next to her husband and children. She's been sleeping next to Myrtle, a full-grown goat with boundary issues. She's also been half covered in a wool blanket that smells like wet sheep and cooked onions. And she's lying on straw, some of which may or may not have hosted a small colony of beetles during the night. So when Marjorie's eyes flutter open, it's not a peaceful moment of zen. It's more like an ancient alarm clock going off inside her joints. Her neck is stiff. Her hip hurts from the lump in the straw. Someone's elbow is lodged firmly in her side. And Myrtle is licking her toes. And yet, she's up. Because morning in the medieval world doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It arrives without a snooze button, often announced by a rooster with zero respect for boundaries. The cottage begins to stir before the sun even commits to rising. One of the kids is already awake, poking the fire. The other is tangled in the blanket, mumbling about dream turnips. Ulrich, Marjorie's husband, is groaning softly, preparing himself mentally for another day of being a human plow. Marjorie sits up, slowly, carefully, because sudden movements mean dizziness, or worse, stepping in something the goat left behind. First order of business, check the fire. If it's still alive, great. If it's out, panic mode. Because starting a fire from scratch in a cold, damp cottage is like trying to light a candle underwater. So she pokes the embers, adds a stick, blows gently, and praises whatever medieval gods are listening when it catches. Then comes the second great fear of the morning. The chamber pot. Yes, the same one from last night. Someone has to empty it. And as per the sacred law of parental misery, it's Marjorie. She lifts the pot with the practiced grip of someone who has seen things that cannot be unseen. She opens the cottage door, greeted by a gust of icy wind and the unmistakable sound of chickens gossiping. And then, out it goes, into the corner of the yard where compost, fate, and questionable choices all meet. Back inside, she sets the pot down, scrubs her hands with cold water and ash, and gets on with it. Breakfast? That's generous. What Marjorie prepares is less meal and more survival slurry. A pot of pottage, a thick, gluey stew made from yesterday's leftovers, turnips, and sadness. It simmers while the family wakes up fully, and the smells, earthy, sour, and vaguely hopeful, begin to fill the cottage. Marjorie doesn't get a moment to herself. Not really. Her morning is an assembly line of labor, dressing the kids, checking Myrtle's hooves, patching the hole in the wall where the wind keeps sneaking in. And let's not forget personal hygiene. Spoiler, there isn't much. She wipes her face with a damp cloth that may or may not have been clean in the last week, brushes her teeth with a twig if she remembers, ties her hair back with a strip of fabric, no makeup, no skincare, just the weathered dignity of someone who's already fought a goat before sunrise. And all this happens before she even begins her actual workday, making candles, which means hours of standing, melting fat, dipping wicks, and inhaling a scent that could be bottled and sold as hot tallow number 5. But here's the thing, Marjorie doesn't complain, not because she loves it, but because complaining changes nothing. And energy is a precious currency. Instead, she moves through her morning with a kind of focused rhythm. Efficient. Predictable. One task leads into the next, like a dance choreographed by necessity. And amidst the chaos, there's something grounding in that routine, something oddly comforting. Because medieval mornings, for all their discomfort, are also incredibly real. There are no illusions, no curated Instagram versions, just raw existence, played out in straw and soot and the quiet hum of survival. Marjorie knows that every morning she wakes up next to her family with the fire still burning and Myrtle still breathing is a small miracle. She might not call it that, but deep down, she feels it. The gratitude, the relief, the strange peace of having made it through another night. She doesn't journal. She doesn't sip coffee while watching the sunrise. But as she stirs the pottage and listens to her children squabble over who kicked who in their sleep, there's a small, silent acknowledgement. She is here. She is alive. She gets to do this all over again. And that's powerful. Because in a world with no security nets, no backups, no plans B through Z, Marjorie wakes up and meets the day with open eyes and calloused hands. Not because she wants to, because she must. And maybe, just maybe, that's what gives her strength. So the next time you wake up groaning about early meetings, slow coffee makers, or the existential dread of inboxes, think of Marjorie. Think of her crawling out of a straw nest, facing the frozen dawn and greeting the day with nothing but determination and a very full chamber pot. Because mornings aren't about perfection, they're about rising anyway. And Marjorie, she rises like a warrior. A very tired, slightly smelly warrior, but a warrior nonetheless. Let's talk about Marjorie's morning commute. No, she doesn't hop into a car or catch a train. Her journey begins the moment she steps outside her cottage, greeted by the crisp morning air and the familiar sounds of the village stirring to life. The sun peeks over the horizon, casting a golden hue over the dew-kissed fields. Marjorie takes a deep breath, savoring the fresh scent of earth and the promise of a new day. Her first stop is the chicken coop. The hens cluck softly, awaiting their morning feed. Marjorie scatters grain, her movements practiced and efficient. She collects the freshly laid eggs, their warmth a comforting contrast to the cool morning air. These eggs will be part of the family's breakfast, a simple yet nourishing start to the day. Next, she tends to the garden. The rows of vegetables, cabbage, leeks, and carrots, require weeding and watering. Marjorie moves methodically, her hands deftly removing unwanted plants and ensuring the soil remains moist. This garden is vital, providing sustenance for her family and a small surplus to trade at the market. With the garden attended to, Marjorie heads to the well. Drawing water is no small task. The bucket is heavy, and the rope creaks under the strain. She fills several containers, balancing them carefully as she makes her way back to the cottage. This water will be used for cooking, cleaning, and drinking throughout the day. Inside, the cottage is beginning to warm as the fire crackles in the hearth. Marjorie sets the eggs to boil and prepares a simple porridge, stirring it gently as it thickens. The aroma fills the room, rousing her husband and children from their slumber. They gather around the table, sharing the meal and discussing the day's tasks. After breakfast, Marjorie's husband heads to the fields, joining other villagers in tending to the Lord's land. The children assist with minor chores, learning the skills they'll need as they grow. Marjorie, meanwhile, focuses on her own work, spinning wool into yarn. She sits near the window, the spindle whirring rhythmically as she transforms raw fleece into thread. This yarn will later be woven into cloth, used to make clothing or sold at the market. As the morning progresses, Marjorie takes a moment to rest. She sips a cup of ale, brewed from barley and flavored with herbs from her garden. It's a modest indulgence, but one that offers a brief respite from her labors. The village is alive with activity. Neighbors exchange greetings, children play, and the blacksmith's hammer rings out in the distance. Marjorie enjoys these moments of connection, the sense of community that binds them all together. Soon, it's time to prepare the midday meal. She retrieves a portion of salted pork from the larder, slicing it thinly and frying it over the fire. She adds some of the freshly harvested vegetables, creating a hearty stew. The family gathers once more, sharing the food and stories from their morning endeavors. After the meal, Marjorie resumes her spinning, occasionally pausing to mend clothing or tend to the fire. The afternoon passes in a blur of activity, each task a vital thread in the fabric of daily life. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the village, Marjorie prepares the evening meal. It's a simpler affair, bread, cheese, and perhaps a bit of fruit. The family eats together, their laughter and conversation filling the cottage. With the day's work complete, Marjorie takes a moment to herself. She steps outside, gazing at the stars beginning to twinkle in the night sky. The air is cool, and she wraps her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Despite the hardships and endless tasks, she feels a deep sense of fulfillment. Her labor sustains her family, and the rhythm of village life brings comfort and purpose. Returning inside, Marjorie prepares for bed. She ensures the fire is banked, the doors are secured, and the children are settled. As she lies down, the sounds of the village quieting for the night, she reflects on the day's accomplishments. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but for now, she allows herself a moment of peace. And so ends another day in Marjorie's life, a tapestry woven with threads of hard work, resilience, and unwavering dedication to her family and community. Let's talk about Marjorie's midday hustle. Because if you thought the morning was a whirlwind of chores and chaos, brace yourself. The sun may be at its zenith, but Marjorie's energy is far from waning. In fact, the afternoon brings its own set of challenges, each demanding her unwavering attention and resilience. After the family's modest midday meal, a hearty stew of root vegetables and grains, Marjorie doesn't retreat for rest. Instead, she dives headfirst into the next wave of tasks. First on the list, tending to the flax. This isn't just a casual hobby, it's a vital part of the household economy. The flax must be soaked, beaten, and spun into linen, a process that's as labor-intensive as it sounds. Marjorie's fingers move deftly, her hands calloused from years of repetition, transforming raw plant fibers into usable thread. But the flax isn't the only demand on her time. The garden, too, calls for attention. Weeds have a way of sprouting the moment your back is turned, and Marjorie knows that neglecting them means a smaller harvest come autumn. She grabs her hoe and gets to work, the sun beating down on her back as she clears the rows of unwanted growth. The rhythmic motion is almost meditative, a brief respite in the otherwise frenetic pace of the day. As she works, the village around her hums with activity. Children's laughter echoes from the nearby stream, where they've been sent to fetch water, or perhaps just to cool off. The blacksmith's hammer rings out in the distance, a steady beat that underscores the industriousness of the community. Marjorie takes a moment to wipe the sweat from her brow, allowing herself a brief smile at the familiar sounds of daily life. But there's no time to linger. The afternoon is slipping away, and there's still much to be done. She heads back inside to check on the sourdough starter she's been nurturing. Baking bread is an art form, one that requires patience and precision. She kneads the dough with practiced hands, shaping it into loaves that will feed her family for the next few days. The aroma of yeast and flour fills the small cottage, a comforting scent that speaks of sustenance and care. While the bread rises, Marjorie turns her attention to mending. Clothes don't last forever, especially when subjected to the rigors of medieval life. She patches holes, reinforces seams, and replaces buttons, ensuring that her family's garments will withstand a little longer. It's meticulous work, but Marjorie approaches it with the same diligence she applies to all her tasks. As the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the village, Marjorie prepares for the evening meal. It's a simpler affair than lunch, perhaps some leftover stew, fresh bread, and a bit of cheese. The family gathers around the table, sharing stories of their day and enjoying the fruits of Marjorie's labor. After dinner, there's still work to be done. The animals need to be fed and secured for the night. Marjorie checks on the chickens, ensuring they're safely roosted, and makes sure the goat is penned. She collects any remaining eggs and stores them carefully, mindful of their value. Finally, as darkness envelops the village, Marjorie allows herself a moment of rest. She sits by the hearth, the fire casting a warm glow across the room, and reflects on the day's accomplishments. Her body aches, her hands are sore, but there's a deep sense of satisfaction in knowing that she's provided for her family. In the world of medieval peasants, there's little room for leisure. Every moment is accounted for, every task essential. But within this relentless cycle of labor, there's also a profound sense of purpose. Marjorie's days are filled with challenges, but also with the quiet pride that comes from meeting them head-on. So as you settle into your comfortable bed tonight, spare a thought for Marjorie. Her day may be done, but tomorrow brings a new set of tasks, and she'll rise to meet them with the same unwavering determination. Because in the end, it's not just about surviving, it's about living with purpose, no matter how humble the circumstances. As dusk settled like a woolen cloak over Wormbridge, Marjorie stood at the threshold of her cottage, watching the sky bleed from gold to ash. The fields she'd worked that day were now painted in twilight, hushed and heavy, and for a rare, fleeting moment, time seemed to pause. Her hands ached, her feet throbbed, and her back felt like it had wrestled a bear and lost, but the work was far from over. Because in the medieval world, nightfall didn't mean rest. It meant a different kind of work, the kind you did in the dark, the kind that creaked in old joints and lingered in smoke-scented clothes. Inside, the fire was still holding on, glowing like the last ember of resolve. Marjorie added a log with practiced care. Too much, and the smoke would choke the cottage. Too little, and they'd all wake up frostbitten and cranky. Again, she moved through the room like a ghost in wool, checking on everything, everyone. Her youngest was sprawled out like a tiny drunk knight, one leg off the straw pile, mouth open in a silent argument with a turnip he'd met in his dreams. Her eldest curled near the hearth, instinctively closest to warmth. Ulrich, her husband, had already passed out in his usual sleeping position, flat on his back, snoring like a saw trying to cut through regret. And Myrtle, the ever-judgmental goat, lay curled in the corner like she owned the place. Marjorie took a deep breath. The scent was familiar, smoke, sweat, and the faint sourness of boiled cabbage, but underneath it all was something warmer. Not fire, not food. Family, that messy, maddening, marvelous bond that kept her going long after her body said stop. She knelt down to sort the laundry. Yes, laundry. At night, because there was no medieval Marie Kondo telling her to wait until she felt joy. Joy wasn't part of the laundry cycle. What was? Dirt, ash, goat hair, sometimes blood, usually from scraped knees, occasionally from less charming causes. She scrubbed quietly, using water she'd hauled from the well earlier, the cold numbing her fingers but not her resolve. As she wrung out the cloth, the sounds of the village at night filtered in through the thatch walls. A dog barked. A baby cried somewhere. Someone shouted half-heartedly at a pig, probably losing the argument. And through it all, the wind whispered, reminding everyone that the outside world was colder, darker, and less forgiving than even their worst days inside. Marjorie hung the wet rags near the fire. If they dried by morning, it'd be a small miracle. If not, well, no one ever died from wearing damp socks. Probably. Next, she checked the stores. The root cellar was nearly bare. The salted meat was running low. Winter had a way of eating faster than any mouth in the house. She made mental notes, dig more turnips, trade for eggs, pray for something, anything to grow early this spring. She sat back, letting the fire warm her cracked hands, and stared into the flames. It was the only screen time she got, and as the wood popped and hissed, her mind wandered, not to dreams, but to plans. Always planning. What needed fixing, sewing, mending, cooking, bargaining. Life didn't offer breaks, it offered breathers between disasters. Outside, the moon climbed the sky, silver and indifferent. Stars blinked like watchful eyes. Marjorie whispered a quick thanks, not because she was particularly pious, but because habit is holy in hard times. A quick prayer for strength, for health, for a day without goat-related chaos. Then came the part she hated the most, resting. Because when you spend every waking moment in motion, stillness feels like guilt, like something's being forgotten. But she knew better now. Sleep was survival, not just luxury, not indulgence. It was fuel. And tomorrow's chores didn't care if you were tired. She stretched out next to her children, pulling the wool blanket over them all like a curtain against the cold. It was scratchy, smelled faintly of wet barn, and had a suspicious stain that no one dared question. But it was warm. And in that moment, warm was enough. Her final thoughts drifted, not to hopes or regrets, but to breakfast. If she could make the bread stretch, if the ale was still good. If the goat eat the kindling again, and then, like someone switching off a candle, Marjorie slipped into sleep. No dreams of castles or riches, no visions of escape or fantasy, just rest. Deep, bone-heavy, well-earned rest. The kind that only comes when you've given everything and still managed to find a little more. Because this was Marjorie's world, not one of power or glory, but of grit, of family, of waking up every day to do it all again. Not because she had to, but because no one else would. And in that quiet, smoky, goat-scented cottage, a warrior slept. Morning didn't greet Marjorie so much as it invaded her bones. There was no rooster, no rays of sunlight gracefully sliding across a windowsill. Just cold, bitter, biting cold, the kind that made your teeth ache before your eyes even opened. Her breath hung in the air above her like ghostly steam, and her joints whispered curses as she tried to stretch. The fire had long since died down to a moody pile of ash and sulking embers. The blanket she shared with her children and husband Ulrich was damp from breath and dew. It clung to her like a second, less effective skin. The goat, of course, was perfectly warm, curled up in the best corner, as smug as any mammal could be while chewing something it definitely shouldn't. Marjorie sat up slowly, already calculating the steps ahead. The last turnip was gone. The last bit of barley scraped from the bottom of the sack. Today meant one thing: the market. And the market meant people. People who talked too much. People who judged how many eggs you brought. People who remembered you tried to sell them a slightly underweight chicken last month and haven't let it go. But first, survival breakfast. She stirred the ashes and added twigs until the fire decided to cooperate. A small, reluctant flame curled to life. Into a pot went the last stale crusts of bread, softened with water, salt, and a single precious onion, sliced so thin it was practically a rumor. The children woke one by one, rubbing their eyes and sneezing from the smoke. Ulrich stretched with the grace of a man who didn't need to boil water or scrape the frost off the bucket. Marjorie didn't hold it against him. Much. They ate in silence. Slurped, really. No one complained. No one had the energy. By the time the sun clawed its way into the sky, Marjorie was already halfway packed. Wool she'd spun, eggs carefully nestled in straw, 2 small jars of honey, each sealed with a prayer and a scrap of waxcloth. She didn't have much, but not much was a feast to someone hungrier. She layered herself in the warmest rags she could find, tied her shawl tight, and slung the basket over her arm. The wind outside slapped her face like an insult, but she didn't flinch. She adjusted her grip and started walking. The path to market twisted through the forest edge, muddy and rutted from wagon wheels. Her boots, stitched more times than she could count, squelched with every step. Frost rimed the edges of leaves, and the trees whispered things she couldn't quite make out. Probably, you forgot the honey again. But this time, she hadn't. As the village came into view, so did the sounds: laughter, haggling, the occasional goat-related crisis. It was a patchwork of chaos, stitched together with desperation and a touch of hope. Marjorie found her usual spot, between the fishmonger, who smelled like disappointment, and the tanner, who smelled worse. She laid out her goods, wiped her nose on her sleeve, and forced a smile. Trade was slow. A few coins clinked into her pouch, but most came in barter: 2 eggs for a half-dozen apples, 1 skein of yarn for a patch of smoked meat. It wasn't profit, it was survival calculus. Midday brought a surprise. A traveling scribe, cloaked in blue and arrogance, set up nearby. He offered letters for hire, lovers' notes, legal threats, even fake Latin blessings for chickens. Marjorie watched him work, his quill dancing over parchment like a drunk mosquito. She didn't trust him, but she admired his hustle. By late afternoon, her basket was lighter and her mood heavier. She had enough to stretch through the week. Barely. She bought a heel of hard cheese, some garlic, and her one indulgence, a sliver of soap. Real soap. The kind that didn't smell like despair. Before she left, she slipped a coin to the baker's youngest, a scrawny boy with a bruised eye and no shoes. He grinned like it was gold. Maybe to him it was. The walk home felt longer. Her feet throbbed, her fingers stung, her back protested every step. But she made it. Back at the cottage, she was greeted by chaos. The goat had eaten half a sock. The children were sword fighting with firewood. Ulrich was asleep again. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just unpacked. Dinner was thin soup and thick bread. The soap was shared like treasure, each person taking a turn to wash off the world. For a moment, they felt human again. After the children were asleep, Marjorie sat by the fire, wrapped in her shawl, hands raw and red. She held the last apple in her palm, not to eat, just to feel something whole. She stared into the flames, not for warmth, but for proof that something still burned. Because in a world where days blurred into each other, where work never ended and rest was rationed, sometimes you needed more than just food. You needed fire, and faith, and soap. And as the wind howled and the goat farted loudly enough to startle the cat, Marjorie smiled. Not because it was funny, but because she was still here, still fighting, still burning. Marjorie woke to the sound of water, specifically the kind that didn't belong inside her house. A slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip tapped out a message from the rafters above, landing squarely on the already worn patch of straw she called a pillow. She blinked once, twice, then rolled onto her side with a groan. Rain. Again. And not the soft, poetic kind. This was the aggressive, ankle-deep, ruin-your-week kind. The kind that made your laundry smell like regret. The fire was out. Of course it was. The ash in the hearth was cold and sulky, refusing to pretend it had ever held warmth. Marjorie wrapped her shawl tighter and swung her feet to the ground, landing in a small puddle that had sneakily formed near the door. She sighed, long and slow, the kind of sigh only women who manage households, animals, children, and husbands are entitled to. She got to work. First, the fire. Always the fire. Without it, nothing moved. She coaxed the embers with dry moss from the rafters, muttering to herself like a half-awake witch. After a few stubborn moments, the flames caught. A small win. Next came the water. She stepped out into the slop with her bucket, the sky unloading its personal issues onto her shoulders. The mud was a jealous lover, grabbing at her boots, sucking them deeper with every step. When she returned with water, soaked to the bone and annoyed, Myrtle the goat was standing on the table. Really? Marjorie muttered, not expecting an answer, and definitely not getting one. After shoeing the goat and wiping the table with a cloth that had seen too many tragedies, she prepared breakfast. Porridge again, this time a little thinner, a little sadder. She stirred slowly, adding a pinch of salt like it might help it forget how underwhelming it was. Ulrich woke with a snort, stretching like a man who didn't just sleep through a thunderstorm. The kids followed, chaotic and loud, arguing over who got the driest seat near the fire. The morning passed in a blur of eating, dressing, barking orders, and stepping around puddles. Then, they were gone. Ulrich and the boys headed to the fields, their figures swallowed by mist and drizzle. Marjorie stood in the doorway, watching them disappear, holding her shawl like armor. The moment they were out of sight, the cottage felt bigger. Not quieter. Myrtle was still chewing something suspicious, but emptier, heavier. Marjorie set about her tasks with robotic determination. She patched the roof with whatever scraps she had left, stuffing wool between slats and praying it held. Then she scrubbed the floor, not to make it clean, that was a myth, but to make it less disgracefully muddy. After that, it was laundry, wet laundry, in the rain. Each chore bled into the next until the light outside shifted from gray to grayer, signaling that afternoon was nearly over. She made bread, such as it was, dense, sour, more weapon than nourishment, but it would keep. She boiled turnips and added a sliver of pork. It smelled edible, which, frankly, was a luxury. By the time the family returned, the fire was bright, the soup was hot, and Marjorie was sitting down for the first time in 10 hours. She didn't say much, just nodded as Ulrich kissed her forehead, his beard wet and smelling of earth. The boys ate like wolves, and she watched them with a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. After dinner, there was candle dipping, another task that stole time and stank of tallow. But the candles had to be made, or they'd be stumbling blind before bedtime. She worked in rhythm with the boys, who pretended to help but mostly flicked wax at each other until she gave them the look, the one that said, "Try me and see if you ever eat again." The night crept in. She told a story, an old one, about a witch in the woods who could turn goats into stone. Myrtle stared at her for a full minute after, probably insulted. Marjorie didn't care. She tucked the children in, layering blankets and rags over their curled-up bodies. They whispered sleepily to each other, their giggles fading with the firelight. Ulrich kissed her goodnight, already halfway to sleep before he hit the straw. And then, once again, it was just her. Marjorie sat near the hearth, the last candle flickering. She stretched her hands toward the warmth, letting the wax melt off her fingers. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and her hands were raw, but inside her chest was a calm that didn't exist in daylight. She'd survived another day. Not in the grand, heroic way legends talked about. There was no dragon, no war, no kingdom at stake. But there was rain. There was mud. There were meals to cook and holes to mend, and a house to keep standing while the world tried to wash it away. That was its own kind of victory. As the final flame dimmed, Marjorie leaned back and closed her eyes, listening to the steady breath of her family, the soft drip of water still leaking through the roof, and the distant thunder reminding her that tomorrow would be no different. And yet, she would face it. Because that's what women like Marjorie did. They didn't break. They baked bread out of dust, turned firewood into shelter, and somehow made love out of nothing but effort. The world may not write songs about them, but it should. The storm had passed, but it left behind a village soaked to the soul. The paths of Wormbridge were slick with mud, chickens wore expressions of deep betrayal, and Marjorie's bones, every single one of them, seemed to have absorbed the damp. She woke slowly that morning, blinking at the gray light filtering through the patched roof, wondering for a moment if maybe she could stay under the covers just 5 more minutes. She could not. The fire needed tending, the goat needed reprimanding, and someone, probably her eldest, had tracked in half the yard and deposited it artfully across the kitchen floor. Typical. She threw off the blanket, sat up, and stretched, grimacing as her back popped like an old door hinge. The children were still asleep, their limbs tangled in straw and each other. Even Ulrich, bless him, was snoring like a bear who'd won a wrestling match and didn't care what came next. Marjorie wrapped her shawl tight and moved toward the hearth, stirring the embers back to life. Fire was no luxury, it was survival. Without it, the cottage would be an icebox by mid-morning. Without it, the porridge would stay porridge dust. As the flames licked upward, she ladled water into the pot, added oats, a pinch of salt, and stirred slowly, already thinking through the day's impossible list. Laundry, bread, mending, barter visit to the baker, and patch the roof. Again, the children woke to the smell of breakfast, rubbing their eyes and fighting over the warmest seat near the hearth. Ulrich rose last, offering a sleepy kiss to her temple and a promise to check the pig trap later. That promise would almost certainly be forgotten. They ate quickly. No time for conversation. Every spoonful was a countdown. Soon the boys were tugging on boots, Ulrich was muttering about axes, and the door opened with a gust of cold air that took everyone's breath for a moment. Then they were gone. Marjorie stood for a minute in the doorway, watching her family disappear into the misty fields. And then, alone again, she exhaled. Her hands found her hips, and she scanned the room. Work didn't wait for inspiration. She began with the dishes. Always the dishes. She scrubbed them with sand and hot water, dried them with a cloth that hadn't been cleaned since midsummer, then moved to the floor. Mud was a permanent guest this time of year. She swept it out with muttered threats and daydreams of a house that floated. By midday, she had bread rising, soup bubbling, and half a shirt mended. Her hands were sore, her sleeves damp, and her hair had come loose from its braid, falling across her face like an overfamiliar guest. She paused for a bite of cheese and a gulp of ale, sitting just long enough to remember how much she loved not standing. Then came the chickens. 2 were missing. One had wedged itself behind the woodpile, and the other, well, Marjorie found feathers and not much else. Likely a fox, or possibly the neighbor's cat. Either way, she sighed and marked the loss on her mental ledger. She'd trade for another bird next week. Maybe. The afternoon passed in a blur of wool, stitching, and goat wrangling. Myrtle had gotten into the drying herbs again and was now both high and deeply pleased with herself. Marjorie scolded her half-heartedly, then returned to the soup, which was threatening to turn itself into glue. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the room, the door creaked open. Ulrich and the children stumbled in, red-cheeked and muddy, laughing about something Marjorie didn't catch. Their energy was chaotic, exhausting, and strangely contagious. She felt herself smiling as they pulled off boots and settled by the fire. Dinner was served. Not a feast, but warm and filling. Bread still steaming from the oven, soup rich with herbs and root vegetables. They ate and talked, and for a little while, it felt like the cottage was bigger than its 4 walls. It felt like enough. After the meal, the children helped with cleanup. Grudgingly, but they helped. Ulrich repaired a broken stool while Marjorie packed away the dried herbs, sorted tomorrow's market goods, and made a list in her head of things she already knew she wouldn't have time to finish. Once the chores were done, they gathered near the hearth. She told a story, this time about a knight who fell in love with a witch who turned his armor into jelly. The kids howled with laughter. Ulrich chuckled and rolled his eyes. Even Myrtle blinked slowly as if mildly entertained. And then, bedtime. Blankets tucked, cheeks kissed, and whispered reminders to stay under the covers, even if someone's foot accidentally drifted into someone else's space. Ulrich was asleep before the last candle was snuffed. Marjorie remained up, tending to the embers, adding wood, securing the door, folding the last bit of laundry. She sat at the table, quiet now, hands still. The moon shone through a gap in the shutters, silvering the room in a soft, forgiving glow. She looked around, the crumbs on the table, the coat slung over a chair, the bowl of half-shelled peas. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, but it was hers. And somehow, against all odds, they were okay. She ran her fingers along a crack in the table's surface, one she knew by heart. It had been there when they moved in, widened over winters filled with crumbs and stories. Like her, it had bent, but never broken. And in that moment, Marjorie smiled, not because everything was fixed, not because the work was done, but because she knew she could do it again tomorrow and the next day and every day after, because that's what strength looked like when no one was watching. Quiet, steady, unbreakable. Because that was Marjorie. Morning returned like a polite but persistent guest, uninvited, unrelenting, and absolutely unwilling to let Marjorie sleep in for even a second longer. The cottage was still cloaked in that soft, early glow of daybreak, the kind of light that tricked you into thinking the world might be gentle for once. It was not. Marjorie's first awareness was of the ache in her fingers, a stiffness that had crept in during the night and now refused to leave. Her second was the sound of Myrtle, the goat, attempting to chew through the edge of a wicker basket like it had personally offended her. Typical. With a sigh that started in her soul and ended somewhere near her cracked heels, Marjorie sat up. The children were still asleep, tangled together in a heap of limbs and blankets that smelled vaguely of hay and bedtime secrets. Ulrich snored softly beside them, mouth open, dreaming of a world where chores did themselves. Marjorie didn't have that luxury. She stood, pulled her shawl over her shoulders, and began her silent morning routine. Fire first. Always the fire. The hearth was stubborn this morning, spitting out sparks like a disgruntled cat. But she coaxed it, whispered to it, begged it in all the right places, and eventually the flames bloomed. Water was next. Outside, the air was sharp, the grass kissed with frost. She walked quickly to the well, muttering under her breath about the damp, about her aching feet, about why goats couldn't be more helpful in general. The bucket groaned as it came up full. She filled her pail, careful not to spill, and trudged back inside. Breakfast was barley porridge again. She flavored it with the last of the honey and a pinch of dried apple peel. Not enough to taste like luxury, but just enough to not taste like despair. The children awoke one by one, eyes blinking, stomachs leading the way. They ate quickly, hands wrapped around warm bowls. Ulrich joined them last, offering a sleepy smile and a shoulder rub that lasted 2 seconds too long before Marjorie swatted him away with mock offense. After breakfast, the men and boys disappeared into the fog to tend to the fields and traps. The youngest kissed her cheek on the way out, his face still sticky from porridge. She stood at the doorway for a long moment after they'd gone, watching their shadows melt into the trees. Then, once again, she turned back into the silence. The day began. She washed, scrubbed, mended, stirred, hauled, bartered, cursed, blessed. The rhythm was familiar, a song her body knew by heart. Each verse a task, each chorus a sigh. She patched Ulrich's only decent tunic, still damp from yesterday's downpour. She swept the floor 3 times, each time certain it couldn't get dirtier, and each time proven wrong. By midday, her feet throbbed and her hands were chapped from soap and wind. She paused only to drink from her wooden cup and steal a bite of cold bread. Then it was time to visit old Hilda. The old woman lived at the edge of the village, where the woods whispered secrets and children dared each other to knock on her door. Marjorie wasn't afraid. She was tired, yes, but not afraid. She brought with her a bundle of wool and a loaf of bread. In exchange, she hoped for dried thyme and maybe some advice. Though with Hilda, advice usually came in riddles that involved pigs and the moon. The walk there was quiet. Even the birds seemed contemplative. When she arrived, Hilda was already waiting at the door, as if she'd known Marjorie would come. She probably had. Inside, the old cottage smelled of dried herbs, old books, and something sharp and sour that Marjorie couldn't name. They sat, shared tea, and exchanged goods. Then, as Marjorie rose to leave, Hilda said something that clung to her for the rest of the day. "Watch the wind tomorrow," she said. "It's bringing more than weather." Cryptic, frustrating, unnerving. Marjorie walked home faster than she came. By late afternoon, the skies had clouded again, the fire was down to embers, the soup was bubbling, and Marjorie was brushing the dust from the windowsill when she saw a shadow approaching the house. Not Ulrich, not the boys. Someone unfamiliar. Her hand reached instinctively for the iron poker by the hearth. The shadow became a figure, tall, cloaked, moving slowly, purposefully. Her heart thudded just once, hard and clear. When she opened the door, the wind rushed in behind him, tugging at her skirts. The man stood silent for a moment, face shadowed by his hood. Then he spoke. "You're Marjorie, wife of Ulrich?" She nodded slowly. "I bring word from the holdfast," he said, voice grave. "There's trouble at the border as some men are being called to service." Marjorie felt her breath freeze. Her hands gripped the doorframe tighter. The man handed her a parchment. Sealed, official, heavy in her hand. He said nothing more, just turned and walked back into the trees. Marjorie stood there, parchment clutched to her chest, long after the man had disappeared. The sky had grown darker, and the wind howled through the branches like a warning. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she went back inside, stirred the soup, folded the laundry, lit more candles, made everything warm. And when Ulrich returned, mud-splattered and smiling, she said nothing. Not yet. Because in that moment, she wanted just one more night, one more meal together, one more story by the fire, before the world reminded them all that peace was only ever borrowed and the wind always came to collect. Marjorie didn't open the letter that night. She left it on the mantel, tucked under the iron poker, pretending, at least for a few more hours, that it wasn't there, that the man in the cloak hadn't come, that her world hadn't tilted ever so slightly under the weight of a royal seal. But as dawn broke over Wormbridge, with fog slinking across the fields like a secret, the letter was still there, still unopened, still heavy with meaning. She awoke before the others, as always. The fire was low, and the cold nipped at her bones like a hungry dog. She stirred the embers with slow, practiced care, not yet ready to face what the day might bring. Outside, the chickens were already squawking, and Myrtle was making noises that suggested she had opinions about breakfast being late. Marjorie moved on instinct. She collected water, chopped herbs, kneaded dough, and checked on the preserves. But all the while, her mind was not in the kitchen. It hovered over that sealed letter, wondering what horrors or orders it might contain. When Ulrich finally stumbled out of bed, yawning and scratching at his beard, Marjorie had already made up her mind. "After breakfast," she said, "we read it together." He froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. His eyes went to the letter, then to her, then back again. "All right," he said quietly. The meal passed with unusual silence. Even the children seemed to sense that something was shifting. When the last bowl was empty and the fire had been stoked high enough to banish the chill, Marjorie handed the letter to Ulrich. His fingers hesitated at the seal, royal red wax stamped with a crest they both knew but had never dealt with directly. He broke it with a single decisive motion. He read aloud. The words were formal, but the meaning was simple enough. The king's forces had encountered resistance near the eastern border. Every able-bodied man in the surrounding villages was to report for levy training within 5 days. Provisions would be provided, compensation promised, but it was, in no uncertain terms, a conscription. Marjorie stared into the fire, her jaw tight. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. "Well," Ulrich said, folding the letter, "looks like I'll be a soldier now." "No," Marjorie snapped, then softer, "No, you won't." He looked at her with confusion, then realization. "You want to run." "No, I want to survive." They argued, of course, not with raised voices, but with that sharp, clipped tone only people who love each other too much can manage. Ulrich didn't want to abandon his duty. Marjorie didn't want to bury her husband. The children sat wide-eyed, pretending to play but clearly listening. By midday, they had reached a quiet understanding, neither happy nor resolved. Just a truce. The rest of the day passed with strange energy. Marjorie worked furiously, preserving meats, drying herbs, preparing the garden for neglect. If Ulrich had to leave, the cottage had to be stronger than its foundations. She taught the eldest how to turn the soil, the second how to sharpen a blade. She showed them where to hide food, where to run if things went wrong. Every task was tinged with goodbye. When night came, the family sat together by the fire, but no stories were told. Instead, Ulrich played a tune on the old bone flute, a soft melody that drifted through the cracks in the shutters and into the darkness. That night, Marjorie didn't sleep. She lay with her eyes open, staring at the wooden beams above her, counting the knots in the wood, feeling the rise and fall of her husband's chest beside her. The letter was folded again on the table, sealed once more with a small stone, as if pretending it hadn't already shattered the world. The next morning brought a visitor, old Hilda. She arrived unannounced, as always, carrying a satchel that smelled of moss and something bitter. Marjorie let her in without question. The old woman didn't ask why the fire was already roaring or why Marjorie's eyes looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Instead, Hilda placed a bundle on the table. Inside it, a small vial of something dark and thick, a pouch of silver coins, and a torn map with marks along the river trail. "I saw it in the smoke," Hilda said simply. "He won't survive that war, not the way they'll send him." Marjorie didn't argue. She just nodded. So the plan changed. Over the next 2 days, while the village whispered and the men gathered supplies for departure, Marjorie and Ulrich made preparations of their own. They didn't say it aloud, but they were planning an escape, not from duty, but from death, from being ground into ash by a kingdom that never knew their names. They would leave on the third night. Just after midnight, they packed quietly only what they could carry: food, tools, the flute, no armor, no letters, just life. But fate, as ever, had a cruel sense of timing. As they opened the back door, stepping into the cool, damp dark, torches flared at the edge of the woods. Voices called out, not friendly ones. The levy had arrived, early, too early. Marjorie felt the world slow. Her heart slammed in her chest like a war drum. Ulrich pulled her behind him. The children were frozen, clutching sacks in each other. The fire inside the house still glowed. A soldier's voice rang out. "Ulrich of Wormbridge, by royal decree you are hereby summoned." There was no point in running now. Not with the children, not with eyes watching. Marjorie stepped forward before Ulrich could. Her voice was steady. "My husband is ill," she lied, "but I am strong. I will take his place." The soldier laughed. "We don't take wives." "You will tonight," she said, gripping the handle of the sickle hidden in her apron. "Or none of us go." For a long moment, the air held its breath. Then the soldier, younger than she'd expected, stepped closer. He looked at Marjorie, then at Ulrich, then back again. "Tomorrow," he said. "We return tomorrow. You decide who it'll be." And with that, they left. Marjorie collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in short, broken gasps. Tomorrow, a word that used to mean more laundry, more soup. Now it meant sacrifice. But tonight they were still free, still together. And sometimes Marjorie realized that was all the victory you got. The night didn't bring sleep, only silence, heavy and tense, blanketing the cottage like fresh snow. Marjorie lay staring at the beams above her head, their lines familiar, almost comforting. But comfort was a luxury they couldn't afford now, not when tomorrow meant a soldier would return, expecting one of them to follow him into war. The small fire at the hearth hissed softly. Outside, the wind rustled the eaves as if the night itself were whispering warnings. Ulrich's breathing was even, deep, but Marjorie knew he wasn't truly asleep either. She could feel the weight of his thoughts, pressing down just as hard as hers. At dawn, she rose quietly, moving through her morning tasks with a kind of eerie precision. She lit the fire, fetched water, ground the oats, boiled them into something warm. She packed a bundle of food, bread, cheese, dried apples, and tucked it under the table. She didn't speak. Not yet. When the children woke, they sensed the difference immediately. They ate quietly, their eyes darting between their parents. No stories, no teasing, just spoonfuls of porridge swallowed like stones. Finally, when the bowls were empty and the morning light filled the cottage, Ulrich spoke. "I'll go," he said softly, not looking at her. "No," Marjorie said. "We're not giving them either of us. Not yet." He looked up sharply. "I know." She pulled the bundle from beneath the table, set it in front of him, then another, smaller one, prepared just in case. "We leave. Today, through the woods by Hilda's trail. There's a path north," she marked it. "You said I said surviving was what mattered." He stared at the bundles, at her, at the children. "They'll come after us." "Let them," Marjorie said, her voice steady. "We've stayed quiet our whole lives, done what we were told, and now that man shows up, demands your life like it's his to take. I won't stand for it, Ulrich. Not now. Not ever." They packed quickly, moving like shadows. Blankets, tools, the bone flute, a small blade hidden in Marjorie's boot. She wrapped her youngest in a woolen cloak and told the oldest to watch the path behind them, always. The forest waited, dark and thick, just beyond the last row of cottages. Marjorie stepped into it first, her boots silent on the damp ground. Behind her, Ulrich and the children followed, carrying the weight of their small world on their backs. The air smelled of moss and pine, the kind of green that lives forever. Birds chirped above, unaware, or maybe uncaring, that lives were being risked below. For hours they walked. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made Marjorie turn, her heart beat in her throat. But still, no one followed. At midday, they reached a bend in the trail where a stream crossed, its water clear and frigid. They drank, rested. The children chewed slowly on apples while Ulrich scanned the trees. "We'll sleep in the hollow past dusk," Marjorie said, pointing north. "There's shelter," he nodded. When dusk fell, the forest dimmed into silence, save for the occasional owl or snap of twig beneath a rabbit's foot. They found the hollow, a depression in the earth beneath an old oak, and made camp. Marjorie lit a tiny fire, just enough for warmth. No smoke, no light to catch from the road. She passed out food and pulled the children close. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to exhale. But peace never lasted long. It was just past midnight when the first shout rang out. "By order of the crown, halt!" Torchlight flickered between the trees, growing brighter, closer. Marjorie's stomach dropped. "They found us," Ulrich breathed. Marjorie stood, grabbed the blade from her boot, shoved the flute into her eldest hand. "Take your siblings. Go. Hide by the rocks. Don't come back until the sun's high." "What about you?" he whispered, eyes wide. "Do as I say." She turned to Ulrich. "If they take me, run. Keep them safe." He opened his mouth, but the torches were already there. 4 soldiers, armor mismatched but swords drawn. Behind them, a village man, one of the blacksmith's sons. "There they are," he pointed. "Told you I saw them leave." "Ulrich of Wormbridge," one soldier barked, stepping forward. "And wife. You're both under arrest for desertion." Marjorie stepped forward, raising her chin. "We're not deserters. We were never conscripted. You came to steal a father from his children. We ran to stop you." The soldier laughed. "The king doesn't care about reasons." Another stepped closer, lifting his sword. Marjorie didn't flinch. But before the blade could drop, there was a sound behind the soldiers, a low whistle. Then a rock. Then another. Then shadows emerged from the trees. Villagers. Not soldiers. Not fighters. Just people. Blacksmiths, bakers, boys with slings, women with pitchforks. Hilda among them, standing tall, staff in hand. "Leave them," she said, voice calm as stone. "Or face us all." The soldiers looked around, suddenly outnumbered, outmatched, not in weapons, but in will. One cursed, stepped back, another lowered his sword. The leader hesitated, then with a grunt he spat at Marjorie's feet. "They're not worth it." And just like that, they were gone. The villagers stepped forward, surrounding Marjorie and Ulrich. "You shouldn't have had to run," Hilda said softly. "We should have stood sooner." Marjorie looked around. These were her people. Her neighbors, the same ones who, days ago, would have said nothing. Now, they stood tall, together. That night, no one slept. But for the first time in days, Marjorie felt something warm bloom in her chest. Hope. Because maybe the world didn't change in great battles or grand speeches. Maybe it started here, in a forest clearing and with tired hands, sharp eyes, and the decision to say no more. And maybe that was enough. The forest, once a backdrop to their village life, had transformed into a kind of fragile sanctuary. It whispered danger with every gust of wind through its branches, yet it also shielded Marjorie, Ulrich, and their children from the eyes of kings and soldiers. After the confrontation, after the villagers had stood beside them and forced the soldiers to retreat, they knew that time was running out. The king's reach was long, and it would come for them again. So they walked. With nothing but bundles strapped to their backs and faith tethered loosely to hope, they pressed deeper into the woods. The forest was no longer familiar. It became a living thing, unpredictable, untamed. Trees arched above them like watchful giants, moss curled over stone like soft skin, and the sounds of owls and snapping twigs haunted every pause. Marjorie led the way with unshakable calm, though her body ached from each step. Behind her, Ulrich carried their youngest, who had fallen into sleep with her tiny hands clenched around a piece of bread. Their 2 older children walked in silence, eyes wide, alert to every shadow. On the 3rd day, they came upon a stream that whispered over pebbles and tree roots, carving a narrow path through the wilderness. They stopped there, drank deeply, and allowed themselves the luxury of washing just their faces and hands. The cold water stung but refreshed. Marjorie looked at her reflection in the pool and barely recognized herself. Dirt smudged her cheeks, her lips were chapped, and her eyes, once soft, had grown sharp and wary. They rested under the twisted limbs of an ancient ash tree, breaking bread in silence. Ulrich drew a rough map in the dirt, lines of mountains, rivers, and guesses. They needed to go north, away from the King's Road. Rumors spoke of freer lands near the old ruins, villages without lords, living quietly under their own rules. It was a long shot, but it was the only one they had. That night, the air grew colder, the sky clearer. They made a fire under a blanket of stars, their breaths curling in silver puffs. Marjorie wrapped her children in wool and huddled close to Ulrich, feeling the slow drumbeat of his heart against her temple. "Do you think they'll come again?" he whispered. "They always come again," she said, "but we'll be gone by then." In the morning, they pressed onward. Each day blurred into the next: trees, hills, fog, frost, hunger, quiet. Some days they met travelers, most of whom offered nothing more than a nod or a warning. Once, a widow in a ruined farmhouse gave them dried pears and told them to keep moving before dusk. Another time, a merchant with a kind smile but greedy eyes offered to take the children off their hands. Marjorie had never clutched her blade tighter. Eventually, they reached the edge of the great forest. Beyond it, open land. Not exactly freedom, but something wider with fewer eyes. They passed a series of burnt villages, scorched barns, abandoned wells, crows circling. Ulrich muttered prayers under his breath. Marjorie kept her knife close. Then, one dusk, they saw smoke, controlled, gentle, rising from chimneys. A village. They approached carefully, not as beggars but as strangers with heavy stories. The people here were lean, quiet, and sun-worn. Suspicious at first until an older man stepped forward and asked Ulrich what he could do with a spade. "Grow life," Ulrich said. "And her," he asked, nodding to Marjorie. "She'll teach your daughters how to heal." "And the children? They'll make your village louder." The man smiled. "Then stay. If you work, you eat." They stayed. The first days were strange. The children spoke only when spoken to. Marjorie found herself waking at dawn in fear, waiting for soldiers to tear open their door. But none came. Days passed, then weeks. They built a modest home, timber, straw, clay, and the village helped. They shared their food. Marjorie shared her skill with herbs. Ulrich joined the fields. By the time the first frost came, they were part of the village. Yet Marjorie never stopped looking over her shoulder. Each knock at the door, each traveler, every letter that passed through the village elder's hands. The fear never left, it merely grew quieter. And still, the world spun on. Her children laughed again. They ran, barefoot and loud, chasing each other through the rows of cabbage. Her eldest helped build a fence. Her youngest learned to whistle. One day, Hilda appeared. No one saw her arrive. She just stood at Marjorie's door, cloaked and smiling. Older, somehow. Sharper. "You did well," she said. "I didn't do it alone." "No one does," Hilda replied. "But you'll be needed again. People are watching." "Let them watch," Marjorie said. "We're not hiding anymore." Hilda nodded, pressed a parcel into Marjorie's hands, dried herbs, a map, a coin, for the next storm. And then she was gone. Years passed, and still no soldiers came. Instead, stories did. Of lords falling, of villages rebelling, of the king growing nervous in his castle, and every night by the fire, Marjorie told her children the story, not just of their escape, but of the stand, of how the people of Wormbridge said no, and how that word changed everything. Because it did. Not all at once, but slowly, like dawn through mist. And in that quiet village, far from the eyes of kings, Marjorie reminded her children every day that bravery wasn't loud. Sometimes it was just standing still, holding your ground, and refusing to let fear have the final word. That, she said, was how change begins. The sun rose over the village, casting golden light on the thatched roofs and cobblestone paths. Marjorie stood at the edge of her modest garden, hands on her hips, surveying the rows of vegetables that had become both sustenance and symbol of their new life. The past months had been a whirlwind of change, from fleeing their old home to finding refuge among strangers who became friends. Ulrich approached, wiping sweat from his brow, a satisfied smile on his face. "The fields are coming along nicely," he said, nodding toward the expanse of green beyond the village. "We'll have a good harvest this year." Marjorie returned his smile, her eyes reflecting both hope and the lingering shadows of their past. "It's more than we could have dreamed of when we first arrived," she replied. Their children played nearby, laughter ringing through the air as they chased each other around the well. The village had embraced them, offering not just shelter, but a sense of belonging that had been absent for so long. As the day progressed, the village buzzed with activity. Men and women worked side by side, tending to crops, repairing homes, and preparing for the upcoming festival, a celebration of the harvest and the community's resilience. Marjorie joined a group of women weaving garlands of flowers, their fingers nimble and their conversations filled with laughter and shared stories. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the village gathered in the central square. Torches illuminated the faces of friends and neighbors, their expressions a mix of joy and anticipation. A makeshift stage had been erected and children performed skits and songs, their voices carrying into the night. Marjorie and Ulrich sat together, hands entwined, watching their children take the stage. Their eldest recited a poem, words filled with gratitude for the village that had given them a second chance. Tears welled in Marjorie's eyes as she listened, the weight of their journey culminating in this moment of peace. After the performances, music filled the air and villagers danced under the stars. Marjorie and Ulrich joined in, their steps light and hearts full. The night was a testament to their resilience, a celebration of the life they had built from the ashes of their past. As the festivities wound down, Marjorie stood at the edge of the square, gazing at the stars. Ulrich joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We've come a long way," he said softly. She nodded, leaning into him. "And we have a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I believe we're on the right path." In the days that followed, life in the village continued with its familiar rhythms. Marjorie tended to her garden, Ulrich worked the fields, and their children attended lessons and helped with chores. The sense of normalcy was a balm to their weary souls. One afternoon, a traveler arrived in the village, his clothes dusty from the road and eyes weary. He brought news from the outside world, tales of unrest and rebellion, of peasants rising against their lords, seeking the same freedom Marjorie and Ulrich had found. The villagers gathered to hear his stories, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. Marjorie listened intently, her mind racing. The world was changing, and their village, once a haven, might soon be drawn into the tides of revolution. That evening, Marjorie and Ulrich sat by the hearth, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. "Do you think it will reach us?" Ulrich asked, his voice tinged with worry. Marjorie considered his question, her gaze fixed on the flames. "Change is coming, whether we like it or not, but we've faced worse and come through stronger. We'll face this together too." In the weeks that followed, the village prepared for the uncertain future. They fortified their defenses, stockpiled supplies, and held meetings to discuss their options. Marjorie emerged as a leader, her calm demeanor and practical wisdom guiding the community through turbulent times. As the first signs of unrest reached their borders, the village stood united, ready to defend the life they had built. Marjorie stood at the forefront, a symbol of hope and resilience, her journey from fugitive to leader inspiring all who knew her. And so, under the same stars that had witnessed their struggles and triumphs, the village faced the dawn of a new era, determined to shape their destiny and protect the freedom they had fought so hard to attain. The village had become a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience in a world fraught with uncertainty. Marjorie and Ulrich, once fugitives, now stood as pillars of their community, guiding their neighbors through the challenges that lay ahead. The news of unrest spreading across the land reached their ears, tales of peasants rising against their lords, seeking justice and freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields, a weary traveler arrived at their doorstep. His clothes were tattered, and his eyes bore the weight of hardship. He introduced himself as Thomas, a messenger from a neighboring village that had fallen under the oppressive rule of a new lord. He spoke of increased taxes, forced labor, and the cruel punishment of those who dared to speak out. Marjorie and Ulrich listened intently, their hearts heavy with empathy. They knew all too well the pain of oppression and the courage it took to resist. After a moment of silence, Ulrich turned to Marjorie. "We can't ignore their plight," he said. We've built something strong here, a community that stands together. Perhaps it's time we extend our hand to others in need." Marjorie nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We'll send aid, food, supplies, and if they're willing, some of our own to help them organize and defend themselves." The village rallied behind the decision, gathering resources and volunteers to support their neighbors. Marjorie and Ulrich led a small delegation to the afflicted village, offering not just material assistance, but also guidance on building a united front against tyranny. Their efforts bore fruit. The oppressed villagers found strength and solidarity, inspired by the examples set by Marjorie's community. They organized themselves, established lines of communication with other villages, and began to resist their lord's unjust demands. As the movement grew, so did the risks. The ruling class, threatened by the unity and defiance of the peasants, responded with violence. Raids were conducted, homes burned, and leaders targeted. Marjorie's village was not spared. One night, a group of armed men attacked, setting fire to the granary and injuring several villagers. In the aftermath, as the community gathered to assess the damage, Marjorie addressed them. "They seek to break our spirit, to divide us through fear, but we will not falter. We will rebuild, stronger and more determined than ever." The villagers responded with a renewed sense of purpose. They fortified their defenses, established watch rotations, and continued to support neighboring communities in their struggle for freedom. Marjorie and Ulrich became known beyond their village, symbols of resistance and hope. Their leadership inspired others to stand up against oppression, and soon a network of allied villages emerged, each supporting the other in times of need. Despite the challenges, the movement persevered. The peasants' unity and determination began to shift the balance of power, forcing some lords to reconsider their policies and, in some cases, negotiate fairer terms with their subjects. Marjorie often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From fleeing their home to becoming leaders in a widespread movement for justice, it had been a path fraught with hardship, but also filled with moments of profound connection and triumph. As the seasons changed, so did the landscape of their world. While challenges remained, the seeds of change had been sown, nurtured by the courage and resilience of those who dared to dream of a better future. And in the heart of it all stood Marjorie and Ulrich, a testament to the power of unity, compassion, and unwavering determination in the face of adversity. The sun rose over Wormbridge, casting golden light on the thatched roofs and cobblestone paths. Marjorie stood at the edge of her modest garden, hands on her hips, surveying the rows of vegetables that had become both sustenance and symbol of their new life. The past months had been a whirlwind of change, from fleeing their old home to finding refuge among strangers who became friends. Ulrich approached, wiping sweat from his brow, a satisfied smile on his face. "The fields are coming along nicely," he said, nodding toward the expanse of green beyond the village. "We'll have a good harvest this year." Marjorie returned his smile, her eyes reflecting both hope and the lingering shadows of their past. "It's more than we could have dreamed of when we first arrived," she replied. Their children played nearby, laughter ringing through the air as they chased each other around the well. The village had embraced them, offering not just shelter but a sense of belonging that had been absent for so long. As the day progressed, the village buzzed with activity. Men and women worked side by side, tending to crops, repairing homes, and preparing for the upcoming festival, a celebration of the harvest and the community's resilience. Marjorie joined a group of women weaving garlands of flowers, their fingers nimble and their conversations filled with laughter and shared stories. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the village gathered in the central square. Torches illuminated the faces of friends and neighbors, their expressions a mix of joy and anticipation. A makeshift stage had been erected, and children performed skits and songs, their voices carrying into the night. Marjorie and Ulrich sat together, hands entwined, watching their children take the stage. Their eldest recited a poem, words filled with gratitude for the village that had given them a second chance. Tears welled in Marjorie's eyes as she listened, the weight of their journey culminating in this moment of peace. After the performances, music filled the air and villagers danced under the stars. Marjorie and Ulrich joined in, their steps light and hearts full. The night was a testament to their resilience, a celebration of the life they had built from the ashes of their past. As the festivities wound down, Marjorie stood at the edge of the square, gazing at the stars. Ulrich joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We've come a long way," he said softly. She nodded, leaning into him. "And we have a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I believe we're on the right path." In the days that followed, life in the village continued with its familiar rhythms. Marjorie tended to her garden, Ulrich worked the fields, Moss and their children attended lessons and helped with chores. The sense of normalcy was a balm to their weary souls. One afternoon, a traveler arrived in the village, his clothes dusty from the road and eyes weary. He brought news from the outside world, tales of unrest and rebellion, of peasants rising against their lords, seeking the same freedom Marjorie and Ulrich had found. The villagers gathered to hear his stories, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. Marjorie listened intently, her mind racing. The world was changing, and their village, once a haven, might soon be drawn into the tides of revolution. That evening, Marjorie and Ulrich sat by the hearth, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. "Do you think it will reach us?" Ulrich asked, his voice tinged with worry. Marjorie considered his question, her gaze fixed on the flames. "Change is coming, whether we like it or not, but we've faced worse and come through stronger. We'll face this together too." In the weeks that followed, the village prepared for the uncertain future. They fortified their defenses, stockpiled supplies, and held meetings to discuss their options. Marjorie emerged as a leader, her calm demeanor and practical wisdom guiding the community through turbulent times. As the first signs of unrest reached their borders, the village stood united, ready to defend the life they had built. Marjorie stood at the forefront, a symbol of hope and resilience, her journey from fugitive to leader, inspiring all who knew her. And so, under the same stars that had witnessed their struggles, the village faced the dawn of a new era, determined to shape their destiny and protect the freedom they had fought so hard to attain. The village of Wormbridge had become a beacon of hope, a testament to resilience and unity in a world fraught with uncertainty. Under the guidance of Marjorie and Ulrich, the community had transformed from a refuge for the displaced into a thriving settlement, where cooperation and mutual support were the cornerstones of daily life. As the seasons turned, the villagers prepared for the annual Harvest Festival, a celebration of their hard work and the bounty it yielded. Colorful banners adorned the streets, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted meats filled the air. Children laughed and played, their joy a stark contrast to the hardships many had endured before finding solace in Wormbridge. Marjorie stood at the heart of the village square, watching the preparations with a sense of pride and fulfillment. Ulrich approached, his face alight with the same satisfaction. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," he remarked, taking her hand. Their moment of peace was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, his horse lathered and eyes wide with urgency. "Riders approach from the east," he announced. "They bear the king's standard." A hush fell over the square as villagers gathered to hear the news. Marjorie's heart sank. The presence of royal emissaries could only mean trouble. She exchanged a glance with Ulrich, who nodded solemnly. The emissaries arrived by nightfall, their armor gleaming in the torchlight. The leader, a stern-faced knight named Sir Cedric, dismounted and approached Marjorie. "By order of the king, this village is to be disbanded. Its inhabitants are to return to their rightful lords, and any who resist will be dealt with accordingly." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Marjorie stepped forward, her voice steady. "We have built this village with our own hands, forged a community from the ashes of despair. We will not abandon it." Sir Cedric's eyes narrowed. "Then you leave us no choice." The days that followed were tense. The villagers fortified their defenses, prepared for the possibility of conflict. Marjorie and Ulrich worked tirelessly to maintain morale, reminding everyone of the strength they had found in unity. As the threat loomed, allies from neighboring villages arrived, drawn by tales of Wormbridge's resilience. They brought supplies, manpower, and a shared determination to stand against tyranny. On the eve of the anticipated confrontation, Marjorie addressed the assembled villagers and allies. "We may be peasants, but we are not powerless. Our strength lies in our unity, our resolve, and our unwavering belief in the right to live free. The crowd erupted in cheers, their spirits bolstered by her words. They knew the battle ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to defend the life they had built together. At dawn, the king's forces approached, their banners fluttering ominously. The villagers stood their ground, armed with makeshift weapons and unyielding determination. As the first wave of soldiers advanced, a cry rang out, "For Wormbridge!" The battle was fierce, but the villagers fought with the strength of those defending their home. Their knowledge of the terrain and sheer willpower allowed them to repel the invaders, forcing a retreat. In the aftermath, the village bore the scars of conflict, but its spirit remained unbroken. Marjorie and Ulrich stood amidst the rubble, surrounded by their fellow villagers, their faces marked by exhaustion and relief. News of their victory spread, inspiring other communities to resist oppression and fight for their freedom. Wormbridge became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of unity and the indomitable spirit of those who refused to be subjugated. As the village began to rebuild, Marjorie looked to the future with renewed determination. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger, ready to continue their journey toward a life of dignity and self-determination. And so, under the same stars that had witnessed their trials and triumphs, Wormbridge stood as a beacon of resilience, a community forged in adversity and bound by the unbreakable bonds of solidarity. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village of Wormbridge. The air was thick with the scent of ripe grain and the distant hum of cicadas. Marjorie stood at the edge of the fields, her gaze fixed on the horizon where storm clouds gathered ominously. The harvest had been bountiful, a testament to the villagers' resilience and hard work. Bundles of wheat stood tall, ready for collection, and the granaries overflowed with the fruits of their labor. Yet, an unease settled over the village, a whisper of impending change carried on the wind. Ulrich approached, his brow furrowed. "The signs are troubling," he murmured. "The king's men have been seen in neighboring villages, enforcing new taxes and conscripting young men." Marjorie nodded, her jaw set. "We must prepare. Wormbridge has stood strong before. We will do so again." The village convened that evening in the communal hall, the flickering torchlight casting dancing shadows on the walls. Elders, farmers, and craftsmen gathered, their faces etched with concern. Marjorie addressed them, her voice steady. "Our harvest is abundant, but we must not grow complacent. The world beyond our fields grows restless, and we must be vigilant." The villagers agreed to fortify their defenses, assigning watch rotations and reinforcing the village's perimeter. Blacksmiths worked tirelessly to produce tools and weapons, while scouts were sent to monitor the surrounding areas. Days turned into weeks, and the storm clouds loomed ever closer. One morning, a scout returned, breathless and pale. "A royal envoy approaches," he reported. "They'll be here by nightfall." As the sun set, the villagers gathered at the gates, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. The envoy arrived, a procession of armored knights and officials bearing the king's standard. Their leader, a stern-faced man named Sir Cedric, dismounted and approached Marjorie. "By order of His Majesty, Wormbridge is to provide a levy of grain and men for the royal army," he declared. Marjorie stood tall, her eyes unwavering. "We have worked these lands with our own hands. We will not surrender our sons or our sustenance without just cause." Sir Cedric's gaze hardened. Defiance will be met with force. The envoy departed, leaving a palpable tension in their wake. The villagers prepared for the worst, training in combat and stockpiling supplies. Marjorie and Ulrich led by example, their unwavering resolve inspiring those around them. As autumn deepened, the threat materialized. Royal forces marched toward Wormbridge, their armor gleaming in the pale sunlight. The villagers stood ready, their makeshift weapons in hand and hearts steeled for battle. The clash was fierce, the air filled with the cacophony of clashing steel and cries of defiance. Despite their lack of formal training, the villagers fought with a ferocity born of desperation and love for their home. The battle raged for hours, but ultimately, Wormbridge stood victorious, the royal forces retreating in disarray. In the aftermath, the village mourned its losses and tended to the wounded. The fields bore the scars of conflict, but the spirit of Wormbridge remained unbroken. Marjorie addressed the villagers, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd. We have faced adversity and emerged stronger. Let this be a testament to our unity and resilience. The villagers cheered, their voices echoing through the valley. They knew challenges lay ahead, but together they would face whatever the future held. And so, under the same stars that had witnessed their trials and triumphs, Wormbridge stood as a beacon of hope, a community forged in the crucible of adversity and bound by unbreakable bonds. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the village of Wormbridge. The fields, once battlegrounds, now swayed gently with ripe grain, a testament to the villagers' resilience. Marjorie stood at the edge of the square, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where storm clouds gathered ominously. The Harvest Festival was approaching, a time traditionally marked by celebration and gratitude. Yet, an undercurrent of tension ran through the village. The memory of the royal envoy's decree still lingered, a stark reminder of the crown's reach. Marjorie knew that defiance would not go unnoticed. In the days leading up to the festival, preparations took on a dual purpose. While garlands were woven and stalls erected, the villagers also reinforced defenses and stockpiled supplies. The festival would proceed, but with vigilance. On the morning of the festival, the village awoke to a sky painted in shades of crimson and gold. The air was thick with anticipation. Children donned costumes, and the aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the streets. Yet eyes remained watchful, scanning the horizon for signs of the crown's forces. As the sun reached its zenith, Marjorie took the stage in the village square. Her voice rang out, clear and resolute. Today, we celebrate not just the fruits of our labor, but our unity and determination. Let this festival be a beacon of our resilience. The crowd erupted in cheers, their spirits bolstered. However, as dusk settled, a scout arrived, breathless and pale. "A royal detachment approaches," he reported. "They'll be here by nightfall." The festival's atmosphere shifted, joy giving way to apprehension. Marjorie's jaw tightened. "Prepare the defenses," she commanded. The villagers sprang into action, transforming the festive square into a fortified position. Barricades were erected and weapons distributed. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, torches were lit, casting flickering shadows. The village held its breath. The royal forces arrived under the cover of darkness, their armor gleaming in the torchlight. Sir Cedric at their helm called out, "Surrender, and no harm will come to you." Marjorie stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "We will not yield our freedom." A tense silence followed, broken only by the rustling of leaves. Then, with a cry, the royal forces advanced. The villagers met them head-on, their determination outweighing their lack of formal training. The battle was fierce, the air filled with the clash of steel and cries of defiance. Despite being outnumbered, the villagers fought with the ferocity of those defending their home. Their knowledge of the terrain and unbreakable spirit turned the tide. By dawn, the royal forces had retreated, leaving behind a battered but unbroken village. In the aftermath, the villagers tended to the wounded and mourned the fallen. Marjorie stood amidst the ruins, her heart heavy yet hopeful. They had faced the crown's might and emerged victorious. Their resistance had become a beacon, inspiring neighboring villages to stand against oppression. As the sun rose over Wormbridge, its rays illuminated a community forged in adversity, united in purpose. The ember of resistance had ignited, and its flame would not be extinguished. The embers of rebellion smoldered in Wormbridge, casting a glow that reached beyond its borders. News of the villagers' defiance against the crown's oppressive demands ignited a spark in neighboring hamlets and towns. The tale of common folk standing their ground resonated deeply, stirring a collective yearning for justice and autonomy. In the nearby village of Stonebrook, elders gathered in hushed meetings, recalling tales of ancestral freedoms long eroded by feudal obligations. Young men and women, inspired by Wormbridge's stand, trained in secret, fashioning weapons from farming tools and forging alliances with distant kin. The air was thick with anticipation, a storm brewing on the horizon. Marjorie, now a symbol of resistance, received envoys from these villages. They sought guidance, strategies, and solidarity. She welcomed them with open arms, sharing insights and fostering a network of communication that spanned the region. Ulrich, ever the strategist, coordinated patrols and information relays, ensuring that any movement from the Crown's forces would be swiftly reported. The crown, sensing the growing unrest, dispatched emissaries to quell the burgeoning rebellion. These envoys, bearing promises of leniency and threats of retribution, were met with skepticism and increasingly outright rejection. The people's patience had worn thin. Words no longer sufficed. In a bold move, the allied villages convened a clandestine assembly in the forested glade of Eldon Hollow. Representatives from over a dozen communities attended, each bringing tales of hardship and resolve. They drafted a charter, the Pact of Eldon, declaring their intent to resist any further encroachments upon their freedoms. It was a declaration not of war, but of self-determination. The Crown's response was swift and severe. A regiment of soldiers marched toward the rebellious territories, intent on restoring order through force. Villages were razed and dissenters captured, but the resistance had anticipated such a move. Using the terrain to their advantage, they employed guerrilla tactics, ambushing supply lines and harassing the advancing troops. The soldiers, unfamiliar with the land and demoralized by constant attacks, faltered. In Wormbridge, the villagers fortified their defenses, transforming their homes into bastions and their fields into traps. Marjorie led with unwavering determination, her leadership inspiring courage in even the most timid hearts. Ulrich's tactical acumen turned the village into a fortress, repelling assaults and maintaining morale. As the conflict escalated, the resistance gained momentum. Stories of their victories spread, attracting sympathizers from distant regions. Artisans, scholars, and even disillusioned soldiers defected to their cause, bringing skills and knowledge that bolstered their efforts. The movement evolved from a series of isolated uprisings into a cohesive force, challenging the very foundations of feudal authority. The Crown, facing mounting pressure, sought to divide the resistance by offering pardons and concessions to those who would renounce the Pact of Eldon. Some wavered, tempted by the promise of peace, but the core leadership remained steadfast, reminding their compatriots of the sacrifices made and the vision they shared. Winter descended upon the land, bringing with it harsh conditions and testing the resolve of all. Supplies dwindled, and the cold claimed lives on both sides. Yet, in the face of adversity, the resistance endured. They adapted, sharing resources and shelter, their unity growing stronger with each passing day. In the spring, a decisive battle loomed. The Crown amassed a formidable force, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. The resistance, though outnumbered, stood ready. They had transformed from disparate villages into a unified front, their bonds forged in the crucible of shared struggle. The clash was fierce and unrelenting. Fields once fertile were soaked with blood, and the air rang with the cries of the fallen. But the resistance, driven by the dream of a just and free society, fought with unmatched fervor. Their knowledge of the land and unbreakable spirit turned the tide. The Crown's forces, beleaguered and demoralized, retreated. Victory came at a great cost. Many lives were lost, and the scars of battle etched into the land and hearts of the survivors. Yet, from the ashes, a new era emerged. The resistance's triumph signaled a shift in power, a move towards self-governance and the recognition of the common people's rights. Marjorie, hailed as a hero, declined titles and accolades, choosing instead to continue serving her community. Ulrich, ever the humble strategist, returned to his fields, guiding the rebuilding efforts. Together, they embodied the spirit of the movement, a testament to what could be achieved when ordinary people stood united against tyranny. The story of Wormbridge and its allies became legend, a beacon of hope for generations to come. It reminded all that even in the darkest times, the light of resistance could shine through, illuminating the path to freedom and justice. The embers of rebellion that once smoldered in Wormbridge now burned as a steady, guiding flame across the realm. From humble beginnings, a cottage fire, a mother's quiet defiance, a village's stand, the movement had blossomed into a confederation grounded in mutual aid and moral clarity. And at its heart stood Marjorie, not as a ruler, but as a steward of the people's hopes. Beneath the ancient canopy of Eldon Grove, where the Pact of Eldon had been signed, a new charter was drafted, a declaration of communal sovereignty. It bound each member settlement not by force, but by shared values: autonomy, equity, and accountability. Councils were elected, rotating leadership ensured, and measures were implemented to prevent the rise of tyranny in any form. Marjorie insisted on codifying protections for dissent, understanding all too well the dangers of a silenced populace. As spring unfurled across the land, Wormbridge flourished. Its granaries were full, its children schooled in letters and liberty, and its people engaged in the kind of governance once reserved for nobles. Traveling scholars and artisans came to learn from and contribute to the village that had become a living parable. In the halls where feasts once celebrated survival, they now toasted progress. Not perfection, but the pursuit of it. And so, as twilight fell over the patchworked fields of the free lands, Marjorie stood once more at the edge of the square. Ulrich joined her, fingers entwining with hers, both silent beneath a sky brushed with stars. "Did we do enough?" he asked. She watched the distant flicker of lanterns in the hills, other villages, other beacons. "We started something," she said. "That's enough for today." And with that, they turned toward home, toward rest, and the promise of another dawn shaped not by decrees, but by the hands of those who dared to shape it together. In the wake of the Confederation's triumph, the realm stood at a crossroads. The old order, once unassailable, now teetered on the brink of obsolescence. The peasants, once shackled by the chains of serfdom, had tasted the sweet nectar of autonomy and were loath to return to their former subjugation. Yet the path forward was fraught with uncertainty, as the embers of revolution smoldered, threatening to reignite at the slightest provocation. Marjorie, the indomitable leader of Wormbridge, found herself at the helm of a burgeoning movement. Her vision extended beyond mere liberation. She aspired to forge a society rooted in equity and justice. To this end, she convened a council comprising representatives from the liberated villages, artisans, and even sympathetic nobles disillusioned with the crown's tyranny. This assembly, dubbed the People's Conclave, sought to draft a charter that would enshrine the rights of all citizens irrespective of birth or station. The drafting of the charter was a Herculean task. Debates raged over land redistribution, the role of the clergy, and the structure of governance. Some advocated for a decentralized federation of autonomous communities, while others pushed for a centralized authority to maintain order. Marjorie, ever the mediator, navigated these treacherous waters with grace, ensuring that all voices were heard and compromises reached. Meanwhile, the crown, though weakened, was not idle. King Alaric IV, seething from his previous defeats, sought to reclaim his lost dominion. He dispatched emissaries to foreign courts, seeking alliances and mercenaries to bolster his depleted forces. Simultaneously, he launched a propaganda campaign, painting the Confederation as a band of anarchists intent on plunging the realm into chaos. The king's machinations bore fruit. A faction within the Confederation, swayed by promises of titles and wealth, began to question Marjorie's leadership. Whispers of dissent grew louder, culminating in an attempted coup. Though swiftly quashed, the incident exposed the fragility of the nascent alliance and the perils of internal discord. In response, Marjorie initiated a series of reforms aimed at strengthening unity. She established local councils to address community-specific concerns, ensuring that governance remained responsive and inclusive. Education initiatives were launched to promote literacy and civic awareness, empowering citizens to participate actively in the democratic process. These measures, though met with resistance in some quarters, gradually solidified the Confederation's foundations. As the Confederation matured, it began to attract attention beyond its borders. Disenfranchised groups from neighboring realms sent envoys seeking guidance and support. Marjorie, recognizing the potential for a broader movement, proposed the formation of a Continental Congress, a forum where representatives from various regions could collaborate on issues of mutual interest. The idea, though ambitious, was met with enthusiasm, signaling the dawn of a new era of transnational cooperation. However, the specter of war loomed large. King Alaric, having secured foreign aid, launched a renewed offensive against the Confederation. Battles erupted across the realm, testing the mettle of the newly formed alliances. Despite initial setbacks, the Confederation's forces, galvanized by their shared ideals, mounted a formidable defense. Key victories at strategic locations turned the tide, forcing the king's army into a protracted retreat. The war culminated in the siege of Eldon Hollow, where the king's forces made their final stand. After weeks of intense combat, the Confederation emerged victorious. King Alaric was captured and brought before the People's Conclave. In a landmark decision, he was stripped of his title and exiled, marking the end of monarchical rule and the birth of a republic. In the aftermath, the Confederation faced the monumental task of reconstruction. Efforts were made to heal the wounds of war and integrate former adversaries into the new societal framework. Marjorie, declining any official position, continued to serve as a guiding force, her legacy cemented as the mother of the revolution. Thus, from the ashes of oppression, a new society emerged, one founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The ember of revolution, once a mere spark, had ignited a conflagration that reshaped the course of history. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another tale where pitchforks met destiny, and ordinary folks rewrote history with nothing but grit, guts, and a questionable diet of boiled root vegetables. Now, before you wander off into the night or scroll into the next video, let's have a quick moment. Drop us a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Are you in your cozy bed with a warm drink or sneaking this during a boring Zoom meeting? We love knowing where our bedtime rebels are tuning in. And if this tale lit even the smallest spark in your imagination, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Seriously, it's free, it's friendly, and it helps us keep digging up the dirt on history, both the glorious and the grimy. Plus, tomorrow night, we've got a story that might just blow the dust off your assumptions about medieval love letters. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep your lanterns burning low and your minds wide open. This is your storyteller. Signing off for now. Sleep tight, dream big, and remember, the past has more drama than a royal family group chat. Good night. See you in the next story.